My name is Evangeline Devereaux, and I was 26 the day my mother taught me exactly what our family legacy was worth to her. I was standing in the parlor of our historic Garden District home in New Orleans, the heavy scent of jasmine drifting through the open window, staring at the empty mahogany vitrine. On the middle glass shelf, the faded navy velvet box that had sat there since before I was born was open, and it was empty. The deep impression of a heavy band remained crushed into the cushion. Grandmother Odette's 18-karat gold mourning ring was gone. Cast in dense gold and detailed with chipped black enamel, that ring was a cornerstone of our Creole lineage. In Louisiana, an heirloom is not just metal and stone. It is a vessel meant to carry the enduring spirit and protection of the ancestors. My mother, Lorraine, walked into the room holding a silk resort blouse and a cup of iced tea. When I asked her where the ring was, she barely paused. She told me she took care of it. She pawned my grandmother's ring because my younger sister Savannah needed a first-class upgrade for her vacation to St. Bart's. My mother looked at the empty box, took a sip of her tea, and told me it was just an old ring and I needed to stop being so theatrical. Welcome to Pan of Vengeance, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with quiet strength instead of noise. If a family member has ever looked you in the eye and dismissed something you hold sacred, you are in the right place. Drop your age in the comments and hit subscribe, because this story starts with a thoughtless theft and ends with a microscopic secret my mother never knew she traded away. I did not scream when she said those words. People think betrayal is always met with shattered glass and shouting. But when a betrayal runs that deep, it just makes the room go very cold and very quiet. As a certified gemologist and an antique jewelry restorer, I spend my days repairing the fragmented history of this city. I sit at a workbench with a loop and chemical solvents, coaxing brilliance out of neglected stones and repairing fractured metal. I know the exact gravity of what was missing from that velvet box. A piece of our history, a tangible link to the woman who built the foundation we were standing on, was currently sitting under the fluorescent lights of some pawn shop. My mother expected me to throw a tantrum. She wanted a screaming match so she could dismiss me as jealous of Savannah's luxury trip. I gave her nothing but silence. The sharp screech of clear packing tape slicing off a plastic dispenser echoed through the parlor. Lorraine was taping a secondary shipping box for her own luggage. She did not even look up at me. I asked her which shop she went to. She sighed the heavy, put-upon sigh of a woman inconvenienced by her own actions. She said she did not remember the name, just some place off the highway that offered quick cash. She said Savannah's travel agent called that morning. The economy seats were too close to the lavatory, and Savannah's anxiety flares up on long flights. Lorraine needed the money wired immediately, and the ring was just gathering dust. "Nobody even wears mourning jewelry anymore, Evie," she said, tossing the tape roll onto an armchair. "It's depressing. You should be happy your sister is getting a proper mental health retreat." I stood there, feeling the pine floorboards under my boots. My mother and sister lived in a world of immediate gratification. Designer labels, resort vacations, and social appearances were the currency they traded in. Savannah was 22, had never held a job for more than 3 months, and treated our family home like a complimentary hotel. Lorraine enabled every whim, treating Savannah's desires as emergencies, and my career as a quaint hobby. I walked over to the vitrine and gently closed the glass door. The brass latch clicked into place. I did not ask any more questions. My mother had no idea what she had actually sold. She traded a priceless relic for pennies, unaware of the secret Odette had entrusted only to me. A secret etched so deep into the gold that a careless eye could never see it. But knowing the secret did not change the fact that the clock was ticking. If she took it to a standard commercial pawnbroker, the ring was in grave danger. Those shops do not care about Creole history or master craftsmanship. They care about the weight of the gold. They pop out the stones and send the band to a smelter to be melted down into faceless bricks. If that happened, Odette's legacy would be erased forever. I turned and walked out of the parlor, leaving my mother to pack her silk blouses. I went straight to my laboratory, a converted sunroom at the back of the house. The space was sterile, lined with ultrasonic cleaners, stereo microscopes, and secure safes. I sat down at my bench and opened my laptop. I have spent years building a proprietary database of dealers, brokers, and estate liquidators across the parish. I knew the underground network of New Orleans antiquities better than anyone. My phone buzzed on the metal table. It was a notification from social media. Savannah had just posted a photo from the airport lounge. She was holding a mimosa, her feet kicked up on a leather ottoman, with a caption about leaving toxic energy behind and claiming her peace. The location tag was the first-class departure terminal. Another notification popped up. Then another. Lorraine had shared Savannah's post to the extended family group chat. I watched the screen as my mother began typing a long message. She told our aunts and cousins that she was so relieved to get Savannah out of the house. She wrote that I had thrown a fit over some old junk in the living room and tried to ruin the departure. She framed Savannah's lavish trip as a necessary medical retreat and painted me as the selfish sister who valued material things over family well-being. The responses started rolling in. An older cousin replied that I needed to get my priorities straight. An aunt sent a praying hands emoji, adding that blood is more important than old trinkets. They were building a wall. Lorraine knew exactly what she had done, and she was preemptively launching a smear campaign to ensure that if I spoke up about the theft, the family would already view me as the villain. It was a calculated move to isolate me. She wanted me to feel outnumbered and back down. I read the messages while the harsh white light of my desk lamp illuminated the empty space on my workbench, where Odette's ring should have been resting for its annual polish. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. For years I had compromised. I had paid the utility bills when Lorraine's accounts ran dry. I had stayed quiet when Savannah claimed the largest bedroom and filled it with expensive furniture we could not afford. I had been the steady, reliable background character in their chaotic lives. But they had finally crossed the line. They reached into the past and stole the one thing that was explicitly meant for me. I closed the group chat and did not reply. Engaging with their narrative would only validate it. Instead, I pulled up the pawnbroker logs for the greater New Orleans area. In Louisiana, pawn shops are required to log the items they take in, but the descriptions are often vague, and the digital records lag by days. If I waited for the ring to show up in a public search, it would be too late. I needed to move faster. I grabbed my keys and a loop. The humid afternoon heat hit me the moment I stepped off the porch. I was not going to play my mother's game. I was going to find the ring, read the engraving, and let them face the consequences of their own ignorance. I started the engine of my car and turned the air conditioning on high. As the cold air blasted my face, a memory surfaced. I was 10 years old, sitting at the same mahogany vitrine. Grandmother Odette was sitting beside me. She had pressed a cool brass jeweler's loop into my small hand. She guided my eye to the black enamel of her mourning ring. "The world only sees the surface, Evie," she had whispered, her voice carrying the rough rasp of too many chicory coffees. The Devereux women must always look deeper. She taught me that day how to spot the difference between cheap glass and real jet. She taught me that history leaves marks, and if you know how to read them, you are never truly lost. My mother never understood that. Lorraine only saw the shine. She only saw what could be traded, spent, or worn to a gala. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the industrial district. The first stop was not going to be pleasant. If Lorraine was desperate and acting on impulse, she would have gone to the highest volume buyers, the cash for gold smelters right off the interstate. These places were essentially butcher shops for fine jewelry. I parked outside a low concrete building with neon signs flashing in the windows. The air inside smelled of ozone and hot metal. A man behind thick, bulletproof glass asked me what I was selling. I told him I was not selling. I slid my gemologist credentials under the slot along with a detailed sketch of Odette's ring. I described the weight, the specific gravity of 18-karat gold, and the antique European cut of the small diamonds flanking the enamel. He looked at the paper, then looked at me. He said a woman matching my mother's description had been in yesterday. She was in a hurry. She complained about airline fees and demanded cash. My heart dropped. I asked him where the piece was. He pointed his thumb toward the back room where the roar of a furnace hummed. He said he processed her intake an hour ago. It was already melted down. I stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, feeling the ground drop away beneath my feet. 70 years of heritage, the soul of our family, reduced to a molten puddle because Savannah needed more legroom. Then the man slid a receipt under the glass. He said the woman brought in a modern tennis bracelet, 14-karat hollow links, cheap retail stuff, not a heavy antique mourning ring. The breath left my lungs in a rush. The ring was not here. Lorraine had pawned her own department store jewelry at the smelter to pad her pockets. But that meant the ring was still out there somewhere in the parish. Savannah must have realized a pawn shop would not give them enough cash for a heavy antique piece. Savannah was greedy, and she was always on her phone. She would have searched for high-end estate buyers. She would have pointed Lorraine toward the French Quarter. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The relief was only temporary. The hunt was far from over. I put the car in drive and headed toward the narrow cobblestone streets of the city. I was stepping into the labyrinth, and I was not going to stop until I held our history in my hands again. The cobblestone streets of the French Quarter vibrated beneath the tires of my car as I navigated toward my private appraisal studio. After the false alarm at the industrial smelter, I knew I needed my specialized equipment and access to my encrypted desktop network. I parked in a narrow alley and unlocked the heavy iron gate leading to my workspace. The air inside smelled of polishing compound and citrus solvent, a sharp contrast to the suffocating jasmine of my mother's house. This studio was my sanctuary. It was a place where history was respected and restored, not discarded for a broader airline seat. I dropped my keys on the metal workbench and picked up a heavy brass jeweler's loop. The cool metal against my palm sent a sudden jolt through my memory. The sterile white lights of the studio faded, replaced by the warm amber glow of the parlor lamps from 16 years ago. I was 10 years old, sitting beside Grandmother Odette at the mahogany vitrine. She had been a formidable woman with eyes that missed nothing and a posture that commanded silent respect from everyone in the parish. That evening, she had taken the mourning ring from its velvet box and placed the brass loop in my small hand. She guided my eye to the dense gold and the chipped black enamel. She told me to look past the surface scratches. "The world only sees the surface, Evie," she had whispered. Her voice was a low rasp, steeped in decades of tradition and hard truths. The Devereux women must always look deeper. True value hides where careless people refuse to look. She had taught me that our heirlooms were not decorative items. They were physical manifestations of our ancestors' resilience. They carried the weight of survival through storms and history. To a Creole family, discarding such a piece was an unforgivable severing of roots. My mother never grasped that concept. Lorraine spent her entire life chasing shiny, temporary things. She collected social invitations and designer bags while treating our true legacy with careless disdain. The memory shattered as my phone began to buzz against the metal table. It was not a single notification. It was a relentless, continuous vibration. I looked at the screen. Savannah had updated her social media again. This time, it was a video of her touring the deck of a chartered yacht in the Caribbean. She spun around holding a crystal flute, her oversized sunglasses catching the tropical sun. The caption read, "Healing from toxic family environments and embracing pure luxury." Beneath that post, the real assault was taking place. Lorraine had spent the last hour working the phones in the family group chats. My mother was a master architect of false narratives. She knew that pawning Grandmother Odette's ring was a line she could not uncross. So she decided to burn the bridge and blame me for the smoke. She twisted the story with practiced ease. She told our extended relatives that Savannah was suffering from severe exhaustion and desperately needed a mental health retreat. Then she painted me as the villain. She claimed I was a materialistic hoarder obsessed with dead history. She told them I threw a selfish tantrum over an old piece of jewelry and tried to ruin my sister's departure. The distant cousins who lived hours away from the city and only understood our culture through distorted hearsay began flooding my phone with messages. They had long abandoned the old ways, preferring modern subdivisions and loud opinions over the quiet dignity of our ancestors. A cousin from Baton Rouge texted that I needed to check my priorities and let go of the past. An aunt left a voicemail saying she was disappointed in my behavior and that I should value living, breathing blood relatives over tarnished trinkets. Another message arrived calling me cold and unsupportive, emphasizing that Savannah's happiness was paramount. I sat in the quiet of my studio, surrounded by ultrasonic cleaners and precision scales. I read every single message. I watched the psychological manipulation unfold in real time. In the past, this kind of coordinated attack would have crushed me. I spent my entire adolescence trying to be the steady, reliable daughter. I chose a quiet, meticulous profession, while Savannah and Lorraine chased the spotlight. I paid the utility bills when my mother's careless spending drained her accounts. I kept the historic Garden District house from falling into disrepair. I was the caretaker of their reality, while they lived in a fantasy. And because I never complained, they assumed I was weak. They thought this public shaming would force me into submission. Lorraine expected me to reply to the group chat with frantic apologies and explanations. She wanted me on the defensive. If I was busy defending my character, I would not have the time or the energy to track down the mourning ring. The smear campaign was a deliberate smokescreen. I set the phone face down on the bench. I refused to engage in their public theater. Responding would only give their lies oxygen. Instead of tearing me down, their betrayal crystallized my focus. The lingering grief over the empty velvet box hardened into cold, methodical determination. They had underestimated my profession. I was not just a girl who liked old jewelry. I was a certified gemologist, intricately woven into the fabric of the New Orleans antiquities trade. I knew the buyers, the sellers, the silent auctions, and the private vaults. I knew how money moved through the French Quarter, and I knew how to find things that people tried to hide. I pulled out the chair and sat in front of my primary workstation. I booted up my proprietary database. This was a secure network I shared with a select group of elite restoration experts and discreet estate liquidators. It tracked recent acquisitions whisper networks and off-the-record transactions across the parish. Lorraine was foolish, but she was also impatient. If she wanted cash immediately to wire to a travel agent, she could not wait for an auction house to appraise the piece. She had to walk into a physical storefront. But the industrial smelter was a dead end. That meant Savannah had directed her toward the high-end buyers, the dealers who catered to tourists and quiet collectors. I began filtering the local intake logs. I bypassed the standard pawn shops and focused entirely on the Royal Street corridor. Royal Street was a different world. The dealers there were purists. They recognized master craftsmanship on sight, and they kept immense amounts of cash on hand for rare walk-in discoveries. I typed in the specific gravity parameters of 18-karat gold. I added filters for antique mourning bands, French colonial-era hallmarks, and black enamel detailing. I keyed in the distinct European cut dimensions of the small diamonds that flanked the center crest. I set the search radius strictly to the French Quarter. The database began to process the query, scanning encrypted ledgers and recent digital intake forms from the Registered Antiquities Guild. The cooling fans on my computer whirred, cutting through the silence of the room. As the progress bar moved across the screen, my mind clicked through the variables. If a dealer on Royal Street bought the ring, they would know its true worth instantly. They would also know it belonged to the Devereux estate. We were a known family in the preservation circles. A reputable dealer would flag the transaction. A greedy dealer would hide it in a private safe, waiting for the heat to die down before selling it to a private collector out of state. The screen flashed. A single result populated on the secure dashboard. It was not a public listing. It was a blind inquiry sent through the Guild network, matching the exact dimensions and material weight of Odette's ring. The inquiry was logged just 3 hours ago. I stared at the blinking cursor. The location pinged back to a specific block on Royal Street. I knew exactly who owned the shop on that corner. It was a man who valued history above all else. A man who would never let a piece of Louisiana heritage leave the state without a fight. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The smoke screen my mother built was already clearing. She thought she had buried the past, but she merely handed me the shovel. The database ping pointed to the heart of the French Quarter, but the digital trail was fragile. I grabbed my keys and locked the heavy iron gate of my studio, stepping out into the suffocating humidity of the late afternoon. The narrow streets of the city formed a labyrinth of wrought iron balconies and crumbling brick facades. Tourists wandered aimlessly with frozen drinks in their hands, unaware of the hidden economy operating right beneath their feet. I navigated through the crowds with a singular focus. My professional reputation was my strongest asset in this insular community. I knew the backdoor dealers, the quiet auctioneers, and the estate liquidators who preferred cash over traceable wires. My first stop was a dimly lit appraisal shop off Chartres Street. The owner was a man named Silas, who owed me a favor after I authenticated a complex Georgian-era brooch for him last year. I walked past his public display cases and went straight to the back office. I asked him about the blind inquiry that triggered my database. Silas pulled up his ledger and shook his head. He told me the inquiry was generic, a simple search for the current market rate of 18-karat gold by weight. It originated from a public internet protocol address near a travel agency. Savannah had been checking baseline prices before sending our mother out to sell. But Silas confirmed no one matching Lorraine's description had walked through his doors. The trail went cold, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I stepped back out onto the cobblestones, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I reached into my coat pocket to grab my phone, and my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed the wrinkled edges against the brick wall of the alleyway. It was a receipt I had pulled from the parlor wastebasket just before I confronted my mother. In the chaos of discovering the empty velvet box, I had shoved it into my pocket and forgotten about it. The thermal ink was faded, but the bold logo at the top was unmistakable. It was the insignia for a notorious cash-for-gold smelter located on the grimy industrial edge of the parish. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This particular operation was infamous within our trade. They did not care about craftsmanship, provenance, or historical significance. They were a high-volume clearinghouse that purchased stolen goods, estate remnants, and broken jewelry, melting everything down into faceless bullion before the end of the business day. They operated in a gray area of the law, processing intakes so fast that local authorities could never recover reported items. Panic clawed at my throat. If Lorraine walked into that building, Odette's ring was not sitting in a display case waiting to be found. It was sitting in a crucible. I ran to my car, ignoring the protests of a passing carriage driver, as I pulled out into the narrow street. I broke every speed limit heading toward the industrial district. The elegant architecture of the French Quarter gave way to rusted warehouses and chain-link fences. The sky above the smelter was stained with the dark exhaust of continuous furnace operation. 70 years of our Creole heritage, the physical embodiment of my grandmother's resilience, was moments away from being erased forever. I parked the car on the cracked pavement and sprinted toward the entrance. The air inside the facility was heavy with the smell of sulfur ozone and melting copper. The roar of the industrial incinerators in the back room vibrated through the soles of my boots. A thick pane of scratched bulletproof acrylic separated the waiting area from the intake counter. A manager with grease-stained hands and a bored expression stood behind the glass, sorting through a plastic bin of tangled necklaces. I slammed my fist against the acrylic, demanding his attention. I slid my state gemologist license under the steel transaction slot, along with a detailed, hand-drawn sketch of the mourning ring. I described the specific European-cut diamonds, the chipped black enamel, and the undeniable density of the antique gold. I told him my mother had been there earlier today and that the item was a stolen historical artifact. The manager barely glanced at my credentials. He told me he processed hundreds of transactions a day, and whatever came through the slot belonged to the foundry the moment the cash was handed over. I did not back down. I stared directly into his eyes and informed him that the Devereaux estate carried enough legal weight to shut his entire operation down pending a parish-wide audit if he melted that ring. I demanded to see the intake tray from the morning shift. The manager hesitated. The threat of an audit in a business that thrived on zero oversight was enough to break his indifference. He turned away from the glass and walked toward the heavy steel doors leading to the furnace room. Every second he was gone felt like an hour. I listened to the roaring flames, imagining the intricate gold band softening, losing its shape, and melting into a meaningless puddle of metal. The anxiety was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The heavy doors swung open. The manager returned carrying a flat, gray plastic tray. He slid it toward the glass. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the contents. There were broken watches, bent silver spoons, and a pile of cheap retail jewelry. Sitting right in the center was the item Lorraine had sold. It was a modern HoloLink tennis bracelet. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. The relief washed over me, but it was instantly replaced by a grim, sobering reality. The bracelet was a cheap piece of department store jewelry Lorraine had bought for herself years ago. She had pawned it here to get a few extra $100 for her own pocket. It was a false alarm. The mourning ring was not in the tray. That meant the ring was still missing. I stepped away from the counter, the puzzle pieces rapidly shifting in my mind. Lorraine was inherently lazy. She would not have navigated this dangerous industrial area unless it was an afterthought. Savannah was the true architect of this theft. Savannah was greedy, entitled, and obsessed with maximizing her luxury. Savannah would have realized that a bulk smelter would only offer scrap value for the gold weight, ignoring the antique premium. Savannah would want top dollar to fund her yachts and first-class upgrades. Savannah would have searched for elite buyers. She would have directed our mother to the purists. The hunt immediately shifted. I walked back to my car, the humid air no longer feeling oppressive, but charging me with renewed purpose. The only people in this city who possessed the cash reserves and the discerning eye to purchase a Devereaux heirloom on the spot were the elite dealers of Royal Street. These were men and women who treated legacy jewelry with immense spiritual respect. They were the gatekeepers of the city's history. I drove back toward the heart of the French Quarter, my mind focused entirely on the high-end antiquities corridor. I knew every dealer on that street. I knew their habits, their private vaults, and their moral compasses. If Lorraine tried to sell a priceless mourning ring to one of them, the dealer would have recognized it immediately. I parked a few blocks away from the main thoroughfare and began to walk. The gas lanterns along the brick sidewalks were just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows against the historic storefronts. I passed the tourist traps filled with imitation silver and cheap beads, heading straight for the velvet-draped windows of the true purists. My destination was a shop owned by an honest dealer who valued preservation over quick profit. A man who had known my grandmother personally. If anyone could intercept the ring before it disappeared into a private collection, it was him. I approached the dark wooden door of his shop, ready to leverage every ounce of my professional influence. But as I reached for the brass handle, I noticed something wrong. The open sign had been flipped over, and the deadbolt was engaged. Through the thick glass, I saw a single lamp glowing in the back office, illuminating a figure standing near an open floor safe. The figure was holding a familiar navy velvet box, and they were not alone in the room. I stood on the brick sidewalk of Royal Street, watching the silhouette moving inside the dimly lit shop. The figure kneeling near the open floor safe was Marcel. Marcel was a second-generation antiquarian and a strict traditionalist within the New Orleans appraisal community. His father had worked closely with my grandmother Odette, authenticating rare colonial silver and cataloging Creole estates before the digital age. Marcel treated his inventory with a reverence that bordered on the religious. He despised the loud commercialism that had infected the outer edges of the French Quarter, preferring to do business with quiet collectors and established local families. His shop was a sanctuary of dark mahogany display cases, heavy velvet drapes, and perpetual silence. I tapped my knuckles against the thick glass of the front door. Marcel turned his head. He did not look startled. His expression remained entirely solemn as he recognized me standing under the flickering glow of the street lamp. He closed the heavy iron door of his floor safe, spun the dial to lock it, and walked toward the front entrance. He turned the brass deadbolt, pulling the door open just enough for me to slip inside. The air in the room was cool, conditioned against the oppressive Louisiana humidity, and carried the rich scent of beeswax polish, aging paper, and lemon oil. He flipped the open sign to closed and locked the door behind me. We stood in the dim light of a single desk lamp. I did not need to explain why I was there. Marcel walked behind his main counter and rested his hands on the polished glass. He spoke in a quiet, measured tone, detailing the events of the morning. He told me Lorraine had pushed her way into the shop shortly after he unlocked his doors for the day. She was loud, frantic, and carrying a designer handbag that cost more than the monthly rent of most local businesses. She dropped the velvet box on his counter and demanded an immediate cash offer. She did not ask for a formal appraisal. She did not ask about the history of the piece or its cultural significance. She only complained bitterly about Savannah's travel itinerary and the ridiculous upcharges for premium airline seating. Marcel opened the box and saw the mourning ring. He recognized the distinct European cut of the diamonds and the intricate black enamel work immediately. He knew the piece belonged to the Devereux lineage. He knew Odette had intended it to remain within the family, passing down to the next generation of caretakers. He told me he faced a difficult choice in that moment. If he appraised the heirloom at its true market value, Lorraine would have realized she possessed a highly liquid asset. She would have taken it to a larger auction house or shipped it to an out-of-state broker to maximize her financial return. The artifact would have left Louisiana forever lost to a private collector who cared nothing for our local heritage or the spiritual weight the jewelry carried. So Marcel made a calculated decision to protect the legacy. He feigned a lack of interest. He pointed out the thick layer of surface tarnish and the grime that had accumulated from years of neglect. He offered her a fraction of the item's actual worth, a sum so low it bordered on insulting. Lorraine did not hesitate. She took the cash without a single second thought, signed a generic intake receipt, and walked out the door. Marcel immediately bypassed his public display cases and locked the heirloom in his private floor safe. He knew it was only a matter of time before I tracked the transaction down through the guild network. He was holding the piece hostage to ensure our history remained intact and secure. I listened to his account, feeling a volatile mix of profound gratitude toward this man and deepening disgust for my mother. Lorraine had traded away decades of ancestry for a momentary convenience. Marcel reached under the counter and retrieved the familiar navy velvet box. He placed it carefully on a black presentation mat. I reached out and lifted the lid. The mourning ring rested inside the cushion. The heavy 18-karat gold was coated in a dull film of natural oils and neglect, but it was undeniably the piece my grandmother had worn every day of her life. I picked it up. The dense metal quickly warmed against my palm, grounding me in a way I had not felt since the morning began. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted banking application. I asked Marcel for the exact figure he had handed to Lorraine. He stated the lowball amount, and I transferred the funds directly into his business account, adding a substantial premium for his loyalty and his strict discretion. He checked his digital terminal, nodded in acknowledgement, and handed me the original intake receipt Lorraine had signed. Her signature was scrawled across the bottom line, a careless stroke of blue ink that severed her connection to our ancestry. I folded the receipt and placed it securely in my coat pocket. I prepared to leave, eager to return to my laboratory and secure the heirloom. But Marcel raised a hand, stopping my departure. He stepped around the glass counter and leaned closer to me. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the gold band resting in my palm. He told me Lorraine was in such a frantic rush to fund that tropical vacation, she never bothered to examine what she was actually trading away. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a high-powered jeweler's loupe. He held the lens over the heirloom and instructed me to look closely at the inner curve of the band. I leaned forward, bringing my eye to the glass. The inside of the band was heavily tarnished, coated in decades of microscopic debris and hardened dust. But beneath the dark grime, hidden in the shadow of the gold, was a faint disruption in the smooth metal surface. It was not a standard maker's mark or a purity stamp. The lines were too deliberate, too intricate to be accidental scratches. Someone had purposefully scored the inner metal with exacting precision. The thick tarnish obscured the fine details, making it impossible to read with a standard hand lens. But the presence of the engraving was undeniable. Marcel lowered the loupe and stepped back. He whispered that true value always hides in the dark, waiting for someone who knows how to look deeper. My heart began to race, hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was not a romantic sentiment or a simple birth date etched into the gold. Grandmother Odette had hidden something inside the one item she knew I would eventually inherit. I thanked Marcel for saving our history and stepped back out into the humid evening air. The narrative of the day irreversibly shifted. This was no longer a simple recovery mission. My mother thought she sold a worthless trinket to buy a vacation, but she had actually surrendered a map. I needed to get back to my laboratory immediately. I needed the chemical solvents and the ultrasonic cleaner to strip away the filth. I needed the high-resolution stereo microscope to read the secret my grandmother left behind. The true game had just begun, and I was the only one who held the key. I parked my car on the dark street outside our Garden District home, avoiding the gravel driveway so the crunch of tires would not announce my return. The house was quiet. Lorraine was likely asleep, dreaming of her next social conquest, oblivious to the disaster she had narrowly avoided. I bypassed the main entrance and unlocked the side door leading directly into my laboratory. The converted sunroom was a sanctuary of clinical precision. I flipped the wall switch, and banks of overhead daylight balance bulbs flooded the space with sterile white illumination. This room was the polar opposite of the chaotic parlor. Every tool had a specific place. Every chemical solvent was meticulously labeled and stored. I walked over to the stainless steel workstation and set the navy velvet box down on a pristine microfiber mat. My hands were steady as I opened the lid and retrieved the mourning ring. I had recovered the physical artifact, but the true work was just beginning. Earlier that day, the ultrasonic cleaner had been just another piece of equipment sitting on my bench. Now it was the only thing standing between me and my grandmother's hidden truth. I filled the glass beaker with a proprietary degreasing solution, formulating the exact ratio of ammonia and gentle surfactants required for high-carat antiquities. I placed the beaker into the stainless steel basin of the sonic machine and filled the surrounding tank with distilled water to act as a conductive medium. I turned the dial, and the machine hummed to life. The high-frequency sound waves vibrated through the liquid, creating millions of microscopic bubbles. This process, known as cavitation, was designed to implode against the surface of the jewelry, scrubbing away debris from crevices no brush could ever reach. I lowered the heavy gold band into the solvent. The reaction was instantaneous. A dark cloud of black, tarnished, dead skin cells and hardened grime plumed outward from the ring, billowing into the clear solution. I stood there watching the physical evidence of my mother's careless handling wash away. For decades, Lorraine had treated this sacred piece of our lineage like a neglected trinket, tossing it into drawers and letting it gather the literal filth of her indifference. She allowed the surface to rot because she lacked the depth to appreciate its foundation. As the minutes ticked by, the dark cloud dissipated, and the true nature of the item emerged. I lifted the ring out of the bath using rubber-tipped forceps and rinsed it under a stream of purified water. I dried it with a burst of compressed air. The transformation was breathtaking. The dull, tarnished metal was gone, replaced by the brilliant, undeniable luster of pure 18-karat gold. The deep black enamel of the morning crest contrasted sharply against the gleaming metal. The enduring strength of our Creole heritage had survived the toxic decay of my family. The rot was merely superficial. The foundation was indestructible. I carried the pristine ring over to my primary diagnostic station. I sat down and positioned the band under the lens of my high-resolution stereo microscope. I adjusted the dual gooseneck light guides, casting a raking illumination across the inner curve of the metal to highlight any topographical anomalies. I leaned forward and pressed my eyes against the rubber eye cups. I slowly turned the coarse adjustment knob, bringing the magnified surface into focus. The smooth interior of the band filled my field of vision. I panned across the gold, searching the area where Marcel had spotted the faint scratches. The blur sharpened into stark relief. My breath hitched in my throat. It was not a random cluster of tool marks. It was an astonishing display of microscopic engraving. A master jeweler had used a specialized burin to etch a precise, deliberate sequence into the gold. The lettering was archaic, utilizing a flowing serif font that predated modern laser engraving by a century. I grabbed a notepad and a fine point pen. I transcribed the characters as I panned the lens across the sequence. It began with a bespoke alphanumeric cipher, a complex arrangement of letters and numbers that formed a distinct locational code. Following the cipher was a specific vault identifier, marked with a traditional French cross. I stared at the transcribed sequence on my notepad. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a deafening clarity. This was not a modern bank routing code. Modern banks relied on digital networks and standardized 9-digit formats. The sequence on the paper corresponded to a historic private depository located deep within the French Quarter. It was an institution established during the colonial era, an impenetrable fortress of stone and iron that catered exclusively to the founding families of the city. They did not use computers. They operated strictly on physical legacy ledgers, brass keys, and wax seals. Grandmother Odette had left a map. She had etched a treasure map into the very ring my mother deemed worthless. Odette knew her daughter better than anyone. She knew Lorraine was blinded by superficial shine and immediate gratification. She knew Lorraine would never bother to look past the tarnish or investigate the inner band of a dark mourning ring. Odette designed this as a flawless test of character. The true wealth of the Devereux estate was hidden behind a lock that only a meticulous guardian could find. She entrusted the key to the one person who possessed the patience and the reverence to clean away the grime. I carefully photographed the engraving through the microscope lens, capturing high-resolution digital files and backing them up to my encrypted server. I secured the physical ring in my heavy biometric floor safe. The dynamic of the entire situation pivoted in that single moment. The frantic panic of the afternoon dissolved. I was no longer a victim reacting to a petty theft. I was the sole guardian of a profound and dangerous secret. I held the keys to an empire my mother did not even know existed. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the laboratory wrapping around me like a protective cloak. My mind began to trace the implications of the historic depository. If Grandmother Odette had left a vault there, the institution would require strict protocols to transfer ownership. They would not rely on a simple phone call or a digital notification. A place built on centuries of tradition would adhere to the old ways of doing business. They would send formal, physical correspondence to the last known residents of the estate holder to initiate the transfer of assets. A sudden memory struck me with the force of a physical blow. The puzzle was not just assembling itself. It was exposing the profound depth of my mother's ignorance. For the past 6 months, I had watched Lorraine complain about the incoming mail. She would stand in the parlor sorting through the daily deliveries, tossing anything that did not look like a party invitation or a retail catalog into the fireplace. I distinctly recalled her rolling her eyes at thick, heavy envelopes sealed with dark red wax. She called them archaic junk mail, sent by local historical societies begging for donations. She found the wax seals pretentious and annoying. She had been throwing them directly into the flames without ever opening the flap. The depository had been trying to contact the rightful heir for half a year. They had been sending formal summons to the Garden District House, attempting to execute Odette's final wishes. And my mother, driven by her endless pursuit of modern luxury and her disdain for the past, had been literally feeding the family fortune to the fire. The realization sent a chill down my spine. The depository would not send those letters forever. If an heir failed to respond within a specific statutory window, historic trusts were often locked in probate or absorbed by municipal conservatorships. Time was running out, and I had no idea how many notices Lorraine had already destroyed. I needed to get to that vault before the window closed, and our legacy was sealed away permanently. The dawn light crept through the plantation shutters of my laboratory, casting long, distinct shadows across the stainless steel workbench. I had not slept. The handwritten transcription of the micro-engraving sat beside the pristine morning ring. My mind kept returning to the fireplace in our parlor. I left the sterile quiet of my workspace and walked through the silent house. Lorraine was still asleep upstairs, undoubtedly dreaming of her upcoming social engagements. I knelt before the brick hearth in the main living room. The ashes from last winter's fires remained unswept, a gray blanket of neglect. I reached my bare hand into the cold dust. I sifted through the charred remnants of kindling and discarded mail. My fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. I pulled it out into the morning light. It was a fragmented disc of dark red sealing wax, partially melted, but still bearing the faint impression of a French colonial crest. Lorraine had been burning our future. For the past 6 months, I had watched her complain about receiving thick, heavy envelopes. She assumed anything that did not arrive in a glossy retail package or bear the logo of a luxury boutique was worthless. She called them archaic junk mail sent by local historical societies begging for donations. She fed formal legal summons to the flames because opening a traditional envelope required too much effort. The Historic Depository had been trying to contact the rightful heir for half a year, attempting to execute Odette's final wishes. My mother, driven by her endless pursuit of modern luxury and her disdain for the past, had been literally feeding the family fortune to the fire. I stood up and brushed the ash from my hands. If an heir failed to respond within a specific statutory window, historic trusts were often locked in probate or absorbed by municipal conservatorships. Time was running out. I had no idea how many notices Lorraine had already destroyed. I needed to get to that vault before the legal window closed and our legacy was sealed away permanently. I returned to my room and dressed with deliberate care. This was not a commercial retail bank. Institutions rooted in Creole history demanded a certain level of respect and decorum. I chose a tailored charcoal suit and pinned my hair back in a severe knot. I placed the transcribed cipher into a leather folio. I slipped the 18-karat gold mourning ring onto my right index finger. The heavy band felt like armor. I drove back toward the French Quarter. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp pavement and blooming sweet olive. The address derived from the cipher led me far away from the busy tourist corridors and neon signs. I parked near a quiet, shaded intersection lined with ancient, sprawling oak trees. The building stood behind a tall, wrought iron fence. It possessed no digital signage or glass storefront. It was a formidable structure of gray stone and dark brick, designed to withstand hurricanes and the passage of centuries. A small, polished brass plaque near the heavy mahogany doors bore a single French word, indicating trust. I pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The interior temperature dropped a sudden 10 degrees, chilling my skin. The lobby was silent, lacking the chaotic hum of a modern financial center. Dark wood paneling lined the high walls, absorbing the sound of my footsteps. A polished marble counter stretched across the back of the room. An older man stood behind the counter, wearing a tailored three-piece suit and a silk tie. His posture was rigid. He was the vault manager, a quiet gatekeeper for the founding families of the city. I approached the marble counter. I did not offer a casual morning greeting. I introduced myself using my full family name, ensuring my enunciation was clear and precise. I stated that I was the granddaughter of Odette Devereaux, and I had come to answer the formal summons. The manager observed me with a neutral, assessing expression. He noted my professional attire and my calm demeanor. He asked for my identification. I handed him my state gemologist license and my passport. He examined the documents verifying my identity before setting them aside. He folded his hands on the counter and stated that the Devereaux estate required a specific physical key to proceed with any inquiries. I raised my right hand and placed it flat on the cool marble. The ambient overhead light caught the black enamel and the brilliant gold of the heirloom. The manager's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. He reached under his counter and produced a brass jeweler's loop and a pair of white cotton gloves. He slipped the gloves on. I slid the ring off my finger and handed it to him. He did not look at the outer crest or the European-cut diamonds. He immediately turned the band over and inspected the inner curve. He brought the loop to his eye and stood in profound silence for a long moment, reading the microscopic cipher my grandmother had etched into the metal. He lowered the loop and handed the ring back to me. He offered a slight nod, a silent gesture of deep respect. He turned and walked toward a heavy iron safe positioned behind his desk. He retrieved a heavy, leather-bound ledger. The spine was cracked with age, and the pages were made of thick parchment. He placed the open book on the counter and traced his gloved finger down a long column of handwritten ink. He found the matching alphanumeric sequence. He verified the vault number. He looked up and told me the estate had been waiting for my arrival for a very long time. The manager produced a long brass key from his vest pocket. He gestured for me to follow him to the back of the lobby. He unlocked a reinforced steel door leading to a narrow stone stairwell. We descended into the basement of the historic building. The air grew even colder, smelling of old dust, dry stone, and metallic preservation. We entered a long arched corridor lined with hundreds of small brass doors built directly into the foundation. Each door represented a bloodline, a hidden legacy preserved beneath the shifting, turbulent tides of the city above. Our footsteps echoed against the stone as we walked down the aisle. He stopped in front of a specific door near the very end of the corridor. The number stamped into the brass matched the sequence from my transcribed notes. The lock mechanism featured two distinct keyholes. The manager inserted his brass key into the first slot. He turned it, resulting in a heavy mechanical click that resonated through the quiet vault. He stepped back, crossing his arms behind his back, and gestured toward the second slot. I realized Odette had designed the ultimate failsafe. The second key was not a physical piece of cut metal that could be stolen or pawned. The vault required a numerical combination that only the true heir could provide. I looked at my leather folio. I entered the remaining sequence from the microscopic cipher into the rotary dials positioned on the brass door. I aligned the final number. A second, deeper click echoed from the internal locking mechanism. I reached out and pulled the small handle. The heavy metal drawer slid outward with a smooth scrape. Inside the box rested a thick stack of immaculately preserved documents wrapped in protective archival parchment. I could see the edge of a formal legal seal and the distinct handwriting of my grandmother on the top envelope. I reached out to break the parchment seal. Before my fingers could touch the paper, my phone began to vibrate relentlessly inside my jacket pocket. The sudden mechanical buzzing shattered the sacred silence of the vault. I pulled the device out, intending to silence it. The bright screen flashed with an incoming video call. It was not a local number. The display showed a Caribbean country code. The timing was far too precise. Savannah was calling from St. Bart's. I stared at the flashing screen, realizing that my mother's superficial world was about to crash directly into my grandmother's hidden empire, and the damage was going to be far worse than a simple pawn shop transaction. The phone vibrated against my ribs. The screen illuminated the dim stone corridor. Savannah's face smiled from the contact photo, a curated selfie taken on a sunlit beach. I did not answer. The sacred quiet of the depository demanded respect, and my sister represented the antithesis of everything this building stood for. I pressed the power button, silencing the device and sliding it back into my pocket. The external world could wait. I turned my attention back to the brass drawer. The vault manager stood a few paces away, maintaining his strict professional distance. I reached inside and lifted the stack of documents. The archival parchment felt dry and brittle beneath my fingertips. I carefully peeled back the protective wrapping. The faint scent of dried lavender and old ink drifted upward. The first document was bound with a thick silk ribbon. I untied the knot and unfolded the heavy cotton paper. Across the top line, written in grand, sweeping calligraphy, were the words, "Last Will and Testament of Odette Marie Devereaux. My grandmother had always been a formidable architect of our family structure. She grew up during an era when Creole matriarchs managed vast agricultural holdings and negotiated complex trade agreements while maintaining an impeccable societal facade. Odette recognized the specific rot developing inside her own daughter long before anyone else did. She watched Lorraine prioritize country club memberships over property maintenance. She saw the vanity, the endless thirst for immediate status, and the profound lack of respect for the sacrifices of our ancestors. I read the legal clauses tracing my grandmother's sharp handwriting down the page. The language was airtight, drafted by a premier estate attorney and notarized a decade prior to her passing. The third paragraph delivered a calculated, devastating blow. Odette explicitly disinherited Lorraine. The document stated in unambiguous terms that my mother possessed neither the intellect nor the reverence required to manage the Devereaux legacy. Odette wrote that placing our history into Lorraine's hands would be akin to throwing gold into the river. The will bypassed my mother entirely. It designated me as the sole primary beneficiary and the exclusive executor of the estate. I set the testament aside and picked up the next document. It was a property deed, printed on thick vellum. I scanned the geographical coordinates and the parish registry stamps. My breath caught in my throat. This was not the deed to our Garden District home. Our current residence was a modest footnote compared to what lay on the heavy table. The deed described a sprawling ancestral tract located just outside the city limits, deep in the pristine Louisiana bayou. It detailed hundreds of acres of untouched cypress forest, navigable waterways, and a historic plantation manor that had been kept off the public tax registries through a network of private trusts. The estate was a hidden fortress. It represented a level of generational wealth I had never fathomed. We were not just a comfortable family living in a historic neighborhood. We were the silent owners of a multi-million-dollar empire. A leather-bound financial ledger sat at the bottom of the brass box. I opened the cover. The pages detailed a compounding trust fund tied directly to the Bayou property. The capital had been accruing interest for generations, undisturbed by market fluctuations or the careless spending habits of my mother. There were enough liquid assets to secure our lineage for another century. I stood in the cold stone vault holding the financial ledger in one hand and the mourning ring in the other. The sheer irony of the situation was staggering. Lorraine had walked into a Royal Street antique shop holding the literal key to unparalleled wealth. She traded the map to a vast bayou estate and a century of financial security for a few $1,000s, just so Savannah could drink champagne in a wider airline seat. My mother pawned a kingdom for a coach ticket upgrade. The dynamic of our family war shifted permanently in that underground room. I was no longer a quiet gemologist trying to retrieve a stolen sentimental trinket. I was the undisputed matriarch of the Devereaux bloodline. I possessed the legal authority, the financial resources, and the ancestral mandate to protect our history from the parasites currently occupying my home. I neatly restacked the documents. I wrapped them back in the archival parchment and slid the entire bundle into my leather folio. I pushed the empty brass drawer back into the wall. The heavy metal scraped shut. The vault manager stepped forward and inserted his brass key, turning it to engage the primary lock. I spun the numerical dials on my side, scrambling the cipher. The vault was sealed. The manager escorted me back up the stone stairwell to the quiet lobby. He did not ask questions about the contents of the box. His duty was to protect the vault, not to inquire about the wealth it contained. I thanked him for his service and walked out the heavy mahogany doors. The midday sun blinded me as I stepped onto the brick sidewalk. The humid air wrapped around me, a sharp contrast to the chilling preservation of the depository. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat, placing the leather folio carefully on the passenger side. I felt an unfamiliar sense of profound calm. I held the ultimate trump card. I could evict my mother. I could cut off my sister, and I could secure my own future with a single phone call to an estate lawyer. But executing that power immediately would lack precision. Odette had taught me to be methodical. I needed to wait in the shadows and let Lorraine blindly dig her own grave. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to check the missed call. Savannah had not sent a follow-up text message. Instead, she had left a voicemail. That alone was highly irregular. Savannah hated leaving voice messages, preferring the instant gratification of video calls or rapid-fire social media updates. I pressed the play icon, holding the phone to my ear. The audio was chaotic. I heard the sharp sound of shattering glass in the background, followed by the loud rhythmic thumping of tropical club music. Savannah's voice came through the speaker, shrill and laced with undeniable panic. The arrogant tone from her earlier social media posts had vanished. She was hyperventilating. "Evie, you need to pick up," she sobbed into the microphone. "You need to call Mom right now. I made a mistake, a really bad mistake. The resort management took my passport. There was an accident on the boat, and they are saying I owe them money. A lot of money, Evie. They are calling the local authorities. Please call me back." The line clicked dead. I sat in the quiet cabin of my car, staring at the dashboard. My sister had not just overspent her allowance on luxury dining. She had triggered an international incident. Savannah destroyed a rented yacht, and the liability was about to crash directly onto my mother's fragile financial foundation. The trap I was preparing to build was already setting itself. The storm was coming, and I was safely inside the fortress. I drove back to the affluent neighborhood, navigating the familiar oak-lined avenues with a strange sense of profound detachment settling over my mind. The leather folio, containing the hidden will of my grandmother, rested securely on the passenger seat of my vehicle, serving as a silent testament to the changing tides of power. The humid southern air pushed against the windshield, but inside the cabin, I felt only cold, absolute clarity. I pulled into the long gravel driveway and parked near the ancient magnolia tree that had shaded this property for generations. Before I even reached the wide front porch, I sensed the chaotic energy radiating outward from our historic home. The heavy wooden entry door stood wide open, letting the stifling summer heat spill directly into the climate-controlled foyer. I stepped inside the grand hallway, and the sound of frantic pacing echoed loudly from the formal parlor. My mother was marching aggressively across the expensive Persian rug, clutching her mobile phone to her ear with white-knuckled intensity. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was heavily disheveled, which was an unprecedented sight for a woman who treated her physical appearance as a strict daily religion. Her face was flushed with a deep, blotchy crimson, signaling absolute, sheer terror flowing through her veins. She wore a flowing silk dressing gown that billowed behind her as she paced, resembling a panicked ghost trapped inside a rapidly crumbling mansion. I stood quietly near the arched doorway, observing the rapid, spectacular wreckage of her carefully curated reality unfolding before my eyes. The desperate matriarch was shouting at someone on the other end of the line, using fractured French and shrill, aggressive English. She forcefully demanded to speak to the highest local magistrate operating within the Caribbean territory. I listened silently as the fragmented details formed a catastrophic picture of truly international proportions. My younger sibling had not merely caused a minor disturbance at an exclusive beach club or overdrawn her checking account at a luxury boutique. Intoxicated and radiating decades of unchecked, unearned entitlement, the arrogant girl had commandeered a rented 70-foot luxury vessel while the contracted crew was temporarily distracted on the resort dock. She slammed the incredibly expensive fiberglass hull directly into a reinforced concrete breakwater at an alarming rate of speed. The local maritime authorities immediately impounded the sinking wreckage and arrested the reckless driver without hesitation. The resulting monetary liability was utterly staggering to comprehend. The leasing syndicate was not asking for a simple credit card hold to cover superficial cosmetic repairs. They demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate, unarguable restitution, just to release the prisoner from island custody and prevent severe criminal charges. Global maritime law offered absolutely no leniency or special treatment for spoiled tourists causing deliberate, wanton destruction. The woman pacing frantically before me was currently facing imminent offshore litigation and the immediate legal freezing of all domestic bank accounts under her name. The panicked woman slammed her communication device down on the polished mahogany side table and finally noticed my quiet presence in the shadowy doorway. She did not offer a conventional greeting or casually ask about my day. She lunged forward, closing the physical distance between us like a desperate predator sensing an incredibly easy meal. She grabbed my shoulders, her sharp, manicured nails digging painfully into the soft fabric of my tailored work jacket. She screamed that her precious youngest child was currently trapped inside a filthy foreign holding cell surrounded by extremely dangerous criminals. She demanded my immediate and entirely unconditional economic intervention to solve the crisis. The desperate mother laid out her delusional rescue strategy with chilling, calculated precision. She commanded me to visit the commercial bank the very next morning, the moment their doors unlocked. She instructed me to leverage my hard-earned professional salary and my flawless, pristine credit score to secure a colossal personal loan. For many long years, I had quietly built my respected reputation in the strict antiquities market, saving every single dollar, while the favored daughter squandered her generous allowance on imported designer clothes and elite social club fees. Now, I was entirely expected to mortgage my entire independent future to pay for this catastrophic, unbelievable negligence. She wanted me to sign away my hard-won freedom just to protect the golden child from finally facing any real consequences. I looked down at the pale, trembling hands gripping my clothes so tightly. I slowly raised my right arm to brush her tense fingers away from my shoulders with deliberate, graceful movements. The overhead crystal chandelier brilliantly caught the heavy 18-karat gold of the ancestral mourning ring resting securely on my index finger. The frantic woman did not even register the precious artifact she had carelessly pawned away for quick cash just a few short hours earlier. Her vision was entirely consumed by her own narcissistic panic and the looming shadow of impending ruin. She escalated her volume even further, weaponizing decades of toxic maternal guilt to force my compliance. She declared that relatives always protect each other, no matter the ultimate cost or sacrifice required. I stood perfectly still, processing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of her hypocritical statement. This exact person had literally sold our sacred lineage to a shady black market liquidator simply to fund the exact tropical vacation that caused this maritime disaster. Now she fully expected me to chain myself to crippling institutional debt to clean up the explosive radioactive aftermath. I looked directly into her terrified wide eyes and issued a flat, undeniable, blunt refusal. My voice remained completely calm, offering no elevated emotion and absolutely no customary apology. I stated clearly that I would never sign a single financial document on behalf of someone who openly despised my existence. The rejected mother stepped backward, stumbling slightly, as if I had physically struck her across the face with tremendous force. Her initial profound shock rapidly morphed into vicious, unbridled, ugly rage. She pointed a violently shaking finger toward the open front entryway, her voice cracking under the immense strain of her fury. She explicitly threatened to permanently evict me from the property if I dared to abandon my blood relative in a critical time of crisis. She loudly claimed the affluent neighborhood estate belonged exclusively to her, and she absolutely would not shelter an ungrateful traitor under her expensive roof. I felt the heavy leather folio resting comfortably against my side, containing the legitimate legal deed to a massive, sprawling bayou empire she knew absolutely nothing about. I did not attempt to argue with her frantic, flawed logic. I did not reveal my hidden monumental leverage that could destroy her instantly. I simply nodded my head once, accepting her harsh, draconian terms without shedding a single solitary tear. I turned my back, walking away, and leaving her completely alone in the silent parlor with her constantly ringing phone and her rapidly collapsing artificial world. The fragile familial bond was officially permanently severed, replaced by a cold, ruthless, silent war. I walked calmly up the grand wooden staircase to pack my personal belongings, entirely satisfied with the beautiful outcome. I knew the aggressive international debt collectors would soon arrive to mercilessly dismantle whatever fragile economic illusions she had left. Evangeline dragged her heavy leather suitcase across the polished hardwood floors of the upper hallway. The deafening silence inside the historic mansion felt suffocating following the explosive confrontation downstairs. Her mother remained secluded within the formal parlor, furiously dialing international numbers, trying desperately to mitigate Savannah's monumental maritime disaster. Evangeline understood perfectly that raw anger would not provide adequate protection against a desperate narcissist facing total financial ruin. She required an impenetrable legal fortress. She pulled her mobile device from her tailored jacket pocket and dialed a secure number belonging to the only relative she genuinely trusted. Camille was her late father's older sister, a fiercely loyal African-American woman who possessed an intellect sharp enough to cut glass. For over 3 decades, Camille had navigated the labyrinthine municipal courts of New Orleans, serving as a highly respected private archivist. She had spent her entire career authenticating ancient property records and uncovering hidden historical documents for elite law firms. Camille had always seen straight through Lorraine's superficial facade. When Evangeline's father passed away years ago, Lorraine had attempted to freeze Camille out of the grieving process entirely. The arrogant widow viewed the intelligent working-class woman as a significant threat to her absolute control, and often dismissed her due to deep-seated prejudice. Now, that same sharp intellect was exactly what the young gemologist needed to survive the incoming storm. They agreed to meet at a secluded courtyard cafe tucked away on a quiet street near the courthouse district. Evangeline arrived early, selecting a small iron table beneath the broad, sweeping branches of an ancient magnolia tree. The warm, humid air carried the distinct bitter aroma of dark roasted chicory coffee and sweet fried dough. She placed her encrypted tablet flat on the wrought iron surface, waiting patiently. 10 minutes later, Camille walked through the arched gateway. The seasoned archivist wore a perfectly structured emerald green blazer over a crisp white blouse, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. Her dark eyes scanned the patio, registering every detail before she approached the table. She sat down smoothly, signaling the waiter for 2 black coffees, using a single elegant gesture. Evangeline wasted no time engaging in pleasantries. She leaned forward, detailing the catastrophic events of the past 24 hours. She explained the pawned mourning ring, the hidden ultrasonic revelation, the ancient French Quarter depository, and the chaotic voicemail from the Caribbean island. She described the reckless yacht destruction and the immediate demand for hundreds of thousands of dollars in offshore restitution. Camille listened intently, her expression remaining perfectly stoic. She did not interrupt or offer useless emotional platitudes. When the narrative concluded, the older woman took a slow, deliberate sip of her steaming chicory brew. She placed the ceramic cup gently back onto the matching saucer, her gaze locked directly onto Evangeline's face, delivering a chilling, grave warning that instantly shifted the entire dynamic of the afternoon. Lorraine is not merely threatening you with physical eviction, Camille stated, her voice low and completely devoid of warmth. She is currently executing a massive criminal enterprise. The court archivist explained that earlier that same morning, she had noticed suspicious activity flagging within the municipal property registry system. Due to her extensive security clearance, Camille monitored all transactions tied to her late brother's original estate. She discovered that a preliminary application had been quietly submitted to a predatory lending agency requesting a colossal second mortgage. The collateral listed on the application was the historic Garden District house, the exact roof currently sheltering Evangeline. The younger woman felt a cold knot form deep within her stomach. The property was held in a complex protective trust established shortly after her father's unexpected death. Lorraine legally lacked the solitary authorization required to encumber the residence with that level of catastrophic institutional debt. Camille anticipated the unstated question immediately. she revealed the darkest layer of the deception. In order to bypass the stringent banking regulations, Lorraine was actively attempting to fraudulently notarize an incredibly old, completely revoked power of attorney document. Years prior, during a brief period of severe medical incapacity, Evangeline's father had temporarily granted his wife proxy signature rights. That specific authorization had been permanently nullified upon his full recovery. Lorraine had somehow retained a physical copy of the voided paperwork. She was now attempting to present it as active, valid legal tender to secure the enormous loan needed to pay off the angry maritime syndicate holding Savannah hostage. She is willing to permanently destroy your sanctuary to save her spoiled child from a foreign prison, Camille explained methodically. Once that fraudulent paperwork clears the municipal ledger, the predatory bank will hold the primary lien. When Lorraine inevitably defaults on the astronomical monthly payments, the lending institution will foreclose entirely. You will be cast out onto the street with absolutely nothing, while your mother and sister flee the jurisdiction. The sheer brazen audacity of the felony hung heavily in the warm courtyard air. Lorraine was willing to commit a serious state crime, risking decades of incarceration, just to maintain her superficial social standing and protect the favored daughter. Evangeline did not panic. She did not shed a tear or curse her mother's name. Instead, she reached across the small iron table and activated her encrypted tablet. She swiped past the security firewall and opened the high-resolution digital photographs she had carefully captured inside the dark underground depository earlier that day. She turned the glowing screen toward her aunt. Camille adjusted her reading glasses, leaning closer to inspect the illuminated display. She expected to see a simple monetary trust ledger or perhaps a modest hidden savings account. Instead, her eyes widened considerably as she read the grand, sweeping calligraphy resting at the top of the archival parchment. She scanned the airtight, flawless legal language drafted by Grandmother Odette's premier estate attorney. She absorbed the explicit, deliberate disinheritance of Lorraine, reading the brutal, factual assessment of the older woman's terminal greed and superficiality. The seasoned archivist scrolled to the second photograph. The digital image displayed the pristine property deed printed on thick, formal vellum. She read the geographical coordinates and the parish registry stamps documenting the massive hidden Creole estate sitting on hundreds of acres of untouched bayou forest. She saw the network of private trusts shielding the ancestral manor from public taxation. Finally, she viewed the compounding financial ledger proving the existence of a multi-million-dollar liquid empire that had been quietly generating exponential wealth for generations. The silence stretching between the two women deepened profoundly. The gentle rustling of the magnolia leaves above provided the only ambient noise. Camille slowly removed her spectacles, folding the frames with deliberate, practiced precision. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face, replacing the previous expression of grave concern. The balance of power had shifted completely. "Your grandmother was a brilliant, ruthless tactician," Camille whispered, staring at the young gemologist with immense, newfound respect. She knew her careless daughter would eventually attempt to burn the entire kingdom down to the ground. Odette specifically designed this inheritance as an invisible trap, waiting patiently for the exact moment Lorraine allowed her insatiable arrogance to eclipse her basic survival instincts. Evangeline nodded slowly, feeling the heavy ancestral mantle settling firmly upon her shoulders. She possessed the ultimate, unassailable trump card. The legally binding documents secured safely inside her leather folio completely superseded any fraudulent mortgage application her mother could possibly manufacture. The Bayou property and the immense associated trust belonged exclusively to her. The court archivist and the meticulous gemologist formed an immediate, unstoppable strategic alliance, right there beneath the shade of the ancient trees. They began constructing a flawless counteroffensive designed to dismantle Lorraine's crude, desperate felony with absolute surgical precision. Evangeline initially suggested marching straight into the lending agency, brandishing the true will to block the loan approval process. Camille raised her hand, instantly halting that premature defensive maneuver. She explained that stopping the transaction early would only result in a minor administrative rejection. Lorraine would simply regroup and attempt another dangerous scheme. To truly eliminate the threat, they needed to let the narcissistic woman walk willingly into her own destruction. The archivist revealed a shocking, terrifying piece of localized intelligence. She knew the exact corrupt notary public Lorraine had hired to authenticate the voided power of attorney. The official operated a shady storefront near the Industrial Canal, known for processing questionable legal documents for desperate clients. Camille proposed a terrifying, brilliant escalation. They would allow the fraudulent mortgage application to proceed just far enough to generate an official, federally regulated wire transfer. Once the predatory bank released the enormous sum of money across state lines, the localized family dispute would instantly transform into a massive, inescapable federal wire fraud conspiracy. Evangeline stared at her aunt, realizing the breathtaking severity of the proposed plan. If they executed this strategy perfectly, Lorraine would not simply lose the historic house, she would face the full, crushing weight of the national judicial system. Savannah would remain stranded in the Caribbean indefinitely, abandoned by her bankrupt criminal mother. The toxic, parasitic branches of the family tree would be severed completely, allowing the true legacy to finally flourish in the sunlight. The gemologist agreed silently, sealing the devastating pact and preparing to watch her mother burn. The humid afternoon sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of the secure private study, illuminating millions of microscopic dust motes dancing lazily in the still air. Evangeline sat across from Camille, observing the seasoned archivist arrange a series of pristine documents upon the polished oak table. They were methodically assembling a weapon constructed entirely of delicate paper and permanent ink. Camille possessed a legendary, terrifying reputation within the municipal justice system for her absolute, ruthless attention to detail. Decades spent navigating labyrinthine civic archives had transformed the older woman into a masterful, unseen tactician. She knew precisely how corrupt municipal systems operated and exactly how arrogant, desperate perpetrators invariably exposed their own monumental crimes. The physical dossier taking shape between them was a breathtaking masterpiece of legal destruction. On the left side rested the authentic heritage documents meticulously retrieved from the freezing underground depository. Grandmother Odette and her brilliant legal mind lived on through the crisp, unyielding testament, lying alongside the heavy vellum deed to the sprawling Bayou plantation. On the right side, Camille carefully placed the freshly printed, time-stamped evidence detailing the catastrophic financial felony currently in progress. The digital footprints were completely undeniable and utterly damning. The brilliant court archivist had successfully tracked the fraudulent second mortgage application, traveling through the complex electronic banking networks. The voided proxy authorization was securely attached, highlighting the forged public notary seal illegally procured from a seedy storefront located deep within the industrial district. Evangeline gently touched the smooth black leather binder that would soon contain these explosive, world-shattering revelations. She felt a profound, unshakable calm radiating through her veins, settling deep into her bones. The frantic, suffocating anxiety that used to govern her every interaction with her mother had completely evaporated, leaving behind only cold, diamond-hard clarity. The young gemologist recognized that Lorraine was blindly, eagerly accelerating toward an absolute, inescapable abyss. Earlier that same morning, a couriered envelope had arrived at the historic Garden District house containing a stiff, heavily embossed invitation. Lorraine had hastily orchestrated a massive, lavish dinner gathering at one of the most exclusive elite dining establishments located deep within the historic French Quarter. The narcissistic matriarch aggressively demanded the mandatory attendance of the entire extended lineage. Evangeline understood the underlying strategy instantly. The desperate, panicked woman intended to weaponize extreme, overwhelming social pressure to force a rapid, unconditional surrender. By surrounding her eldest child with judgmental, greedy relatives, Lorraine calculated that public humiliation would easily break any lingering resistance. She planned to ambush the young independent professional with a predatory financial contract disguised clumsily as a noble, essential family duty. The dramatic irony of the situation was almost overwhelmingly thick and deeply satisfying. As the long afternoon shadows stretched across the courtyard, Evangeline pictured the frantic hostess spending exorbitant, ridiculous sums of non-existent capital. Lorraine was undoubtedly ordering imported vintage champagne and reserving private, opulent dining salons using elite credit accounts that were mere days away from catastrophic, permanent default. The matriarch was literally bankrupting herself to fully fund her own lavish, spectacular execution. Every single expensive appetizer and premium crafted cocktail purchased only accelerated the impending disastrous financial collapse. She was digging a grave and throwing a luxurious party to celebrate the effort. Evangeline moved quietly to her spacious bedroom to prepare for the inevitable evening engagement. She completely bypassed the bright, trendy, superficial garments her mother constantly pressured her to wear. Instead, she selected a highly structured, flawlessly tailored dress in a deep midnight navy hue. The heavy, premium fabric draped elegantly, providing a striking silhouette of quiet, unbreakable power. She pinned her dark, heavy hair back into a severe, flawless twist, removing any soft, vulnerable framing from her face. She applied very minimal cosmetics, allowing the natural, sharp, commanding contours of her bone structure to stand prominently in the mirror. She looked exactly like the formidable, calculating Creole women who had ruthlessly built their ancestral empire generations ago. Finally, she opened a small velvet box resting securely upon her wooden vanity. The heavy 18-karat gold mourning ring gleamed brilliantly beneath the soft artificial lighting. She slid the cold, smooth metal onto her right index finger, feeling the weight settle perfectly into place. The microscopic cipher etched inside the band pressed firmly against her warm skin, serving as a continuous physical reminder of her true, absolute authority. She was no longer a marginalized, ignored inhabitant of a rapidly crumbling domestic kingdom. She was the sole, legitimate guardian of a multi-million-dollar legacy prepared to defend her borders. The designated restaurant occupied a stunning renovated courtyard, originally constructed during the late 18th century. Flickering gas lanterns cast warm, dancing shadows across the damp historical brick walls and the lush, fragrant tropical foliage. Evangeline handed her vehicle keys to the uniformed valet and walked gracefully through the heavy, wrought iron entry gates. The experienced maitre d' recognized her distinguished posture instantly and escorted her silently toward a secluded, private dining pavilion situated near a gently bubbling, carved stone fountain. The chaotic noise hit her ears before she even crossed the arched threshold. The gathered extended relatives were laughing loudly, clinking crystal flutes, and indulging greedily in premium, expensive delicacies. Lorraine sat firmly at the absolute center of the long banquet table, radiating a brittle, terrifying, artificial triumph. She wore a sparkling, imported designer gown that likely cost more than a typical automotive down payment. Her styled blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, masking the desperate criminal panic boiling violently just beneath her polished surface. The extended family members were notorious lifelong sycophants. They historically gravitated toward whichever individual projected the most immediate, visible wealth. They constantly praised Lorraine loudly, while secretly harboring deep, bitter jealousies. Evangeline stepped into the warm, inviting glow of the overhead chandeliers, clutching the sleek leather dossier firmly in her left hand. The ambient, cheerful chatter ceased abruptly as the guests collectively noticed her imposing, unexpected arrival. Lorraine stood up quickly, holding a half-empty glass of expensive, sparkling wine. She flashed a predatory, aggressive smile that did not reach her cold, terrified eyes. The matriarch loudly, dramatically announced that the guest of honor had finally arrived to save the day. She aggressively gestured toward an empty velvet chair positioned strategically near the head of the table, isolating the target. Evangeline remained standing near the entrance, refusing completely to take the designated vulnerable seat. She observed the eager, greedy faces staring back at her, assessing their shifting loyalties. Next to her mother's porcelain plate lay a thick stack of stapled legal documents. It was the horrific binding repayment agreement designed specifically to enslave the young professional under a literal mountain of crushing institutional debt. Lorraine planned to coerce a public legal signature right there between the decadent appetizer course and the main roasted entree. The aggressive hostess clapped her hands together, demanding absolute, undivided attention from the captive audience. She launched immediately into a highly rehearsed, theatrical, emotional monologue detailing the terrible, unfair tragedy that had supposedly befallen poor, innocent Savannah. She painted a vivid, entirely inaccurate picture of cruel international persecution, completely ignoring the reckless intoxication and the deliberate, arrogant yacht destruction. She turned her piercing, desperate gaze toward her eldest daughter, publicly declaring that family must always endure monumental sacrifices to protect their own shared blood. Evangeline felt the comforting heavy weight of the ancestral ring anchoring her spirit to the earth. She stepped forward, smoothly placing the black leather dossier directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sharp, heavy thud of the binder silenced the matriarch mid-sentence. A new, unpredictable, dangerous variable had suddenly entered the carefully controlled, manipulative environment. Before the confident gemologist could even open the explosive folder to present her undeniable evidence, a distinguished-looking gentleman seated at the far end of the table abruptly cleared his throat. He was a senior partner at a prominent corporate law firm and a distant cousin who rarely attended these superficial gatherings. He pulled a violently buzzing mobile device from his tailored suit pocket, his facial expression shifting rapidly from polite boredom to profound, absolute shock. He looked directly at Lorraine and announced loudly that a major federal banking regulator had just frozen the primary trust accounts associated with the Garden District property. The predatory fraudulent loan application had triggered a massive automated security protocol within the Federal Reserve System. The invisible trap had sprung, prematurely exposing the massive mortgage forgery to the entire stunned audience. The elaborate social ambush immediately collapsed, transforming the elegant, lavish dinner party into a chaotic, inescapable legal ground zero. Evangeline observed the opulent dining room with clinical detachment. The flickering gaslight cast elongated shadows across the antique brickwork. Her extended clan occupied the long banquet table like vultures circling a fresh kill. These relatives possessed a long documented history of worshiping visible capital above any genuine human connection. They descended from ruthless maritime merchants who dominated the 19th century trade routes, but modern economic shifts had rendered their immense fortunes largely obsolete. Now they survived by clinging desperately to whoever displayed the most immediate liquidity. Tonight, that temporary beacon was Lorraine. The desperate hostess poured another measure of premium vintage champagne into her crystal flute. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the sheer terror hiding beneath her imported designer gown. She was aggressively funding this lavish spectacle, using credit lines that were mere hours away from catastrophic, permanent collapse. Evangeline felt the solid weight of the ancestral mourning ring resting securely on her index finger. The 18-karat gold artifact grounded her spirit, providing an invisible, impenetrable armor against the incoming psychological assault. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the private pavilion swung open wide. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered kin. Savannah stood framed in the arched doorway, looking completely out of place in her wrinkled resort attire. The youngest sibling had miraculously escaped her Caribbean captivity. Evangeline deduced quickly that their panicked parent must have utilized the very first fractional float from the fraudulent mortgage application simply to secure emergency international airfare. The spoiled girl possessed messy, sun-bleached hair and a profound, unearned arrogance. She strolled casually toward the head of the table, ignoring the bewildered stares of her aunts and uncles. She dropped her woven designer beach bag onto the pristine white tablecloth, behaving as though destroying a luxury yacht was merely a minor inconvenient scheduling conflict. The tension inside the historic restaurant immediately spiked to a dangerous boiling point. The clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain plates ceased entirely. Lorraine seized the dramatic opportunity perfectly. She picked up a heavy silver spoon and struck the side of her delicate drinking glass. The sharp ringing sound commanded absolute silence from the captive audience. The matriarch stood tall, adopting the calculated posture of a profoundly weary, deeply wounded martyr. She scanned the faces of her gathered kin, ensuring she possessed their undivided attention before launching her theatrical offensive. She began weaving a completely fabricated, intensely tragic narrative regarding the recent offshore events. According to her weeping, tearful testimony, poor, innocent Savannah had been brutally victimized by corrupt foreign authorities following a terrifying, unavoidable maritime accident. The elder woman described her youngest offspring as a fragile, helpless victim, trapped in a dangerous tropical nightmare, facing cruel, unjust persecution from greedy locals. The older relatives leaned forward, murmuring sympathetic condolences. Their collective gaze slowly shifted toward the quiet gemologist sitting near the edge of the light. Lorraine pointed a shaking, perfectly manicured finger directly at Evangeline. The furious mother escalated her public attack, transforming her sorrow into righteous, indignant rage. She loudly berated her eldest offspring for demonstrating catastrophic moral failure during a critical domestic emergency. She claimed that Evangeline possessed immense accumulated savings from her successful antiquities career, but coldly, ruthlessly refused to provide even a single cent to rescue her own flesh and blood. The luxurious pavilion grew agonizingly quiet. The heavy, humid Louisiana air felt thick enough to slice with a steak knife. Disapproving glares shot across the floral centerpieces, targeting the independent professional. The older generation fiercely believed that individual boundaries must always surrender to collective tribal demands, regardless of the inherent toxicity involved. They judged Evangeline harshly, silently convicting her of supreme disloyalty. Lorraine sensed the shifting momentum and executed her final, crushing maneuver. She reached into her expensive beaded clutch and produced a thick stack of stapled legal documents. It was the horrific, predatory repayment agreement designed specifically to shackle the young expert beneath a literal mountain of crippling institutional debt. The triumphant hostess slid the menacing paperwork forcefully across the smooth linen surface until it stopped inches away from Evangeline's resting hands. "You must choose your loyalties right now," Evie, the desperate woman, announced, her voice vibrating with venomous authority. "You will either sign this contract and prove you belong to this bloodline, or you will pack your belongings tomorrow morning and vacate my home forever." It was a brutal, spectacular public ultimatum. The ambush was meticulously engineered to strike every single vulnerable emotional nerve, designed specifically to trigger a massive, devastating psychological breakdown. A normal person would have crumbled under the immense, suffocating weight of the collective familial judgment. They would have wept openly, begged for unwarranted forgiveness, or screamed in futile defensive anger. Savannah leaned over the back of an empty velvet chair, her lips curling into a vicious, deeply satisfied smirk. The golden child retrieved a sleek, polished silver writing instrument from her pocket. She literally held the expensive pen outward, offering her sister the exact tool required to formally sign away her entire financial independence. The spoiled girl fully expected immediate, unconditional capitulation, because that was the only dynamic she had ever experienced. However, the calculated manipulation slammed forcefully into a solid, unyielding brick wall. Evangeline did not shed a single solitary tear. She did not raise her voice to offer any panicked defense. Her breathing remained remarkably slow, steady, and profoundly controlled. The brilliant gemologist simply sat motionless, absorbing the toxic theatrical display with absolute chilling indifference. Her unnatural, profound stillness immediately began unnerving Lorraine to her very core. The elder woman expected a chaotic, weeping surrender, not this terrifying, statuesque composure. Evangeline possessed the secret, explosive dossier resting quietly inside her dark leather portfolio. She already held the verified, authentic testament and the pristine Bayou property deed, legally establishing her as the sole, undisputed sovereign of their vast generational wealth. She knew her mother was currently masquerading as a powerful queen while standing unknowingly upon a rapidly disintegrating trapdoor. Evangeline shifted her gaze slowly away from the threatening legal contract. She looked directly past the gleaming silver pen hovering aggressively in the air. She locked her dark, piercing eyes onto her mother's rapidly paling face. The sheer intensity of her silent, confident stare caused the surrounding relatives to shift uncomfortably in their expensive padded seats. The independent woman was radiating the fierce, unbreakable strength of their formidable Creole ancestors, projecting an aura of total, absolute dominance. The unexpected serene reaction introduced a severe, jarring conflict into the aggressive scenario. Lorraine began to visibly panic, realizing her ultimate weapon had completely failed to inflict the intended catastrophic damage. The matriarch's breathing hitched slightly, and her confident posture faltered. She had brought a superficial paper threat to a hidden, devastating nuclear war. Evangeline gently placed her fingertips upon the blank signature line of the fraudulent contract, tapping the smooth paper once, twice, 3 times. The rhythmic sound echoed loudly in the silent room, signaling that the defensive phase of this bitter engagement had officially ended, and the brutal counteroffensive was about to begin. The audience remained completely captive, eager to witness the impending slaughter. Evangeline mentally reviewed the incredible sequence of events that had led her to this opulent battlefield. Only 48 hours prior, she was a diligent, focused employee, carefully examining ancient stones beneath bright, fluorescent laboratory lights. Her entire existence had revolved around microscopic inclusions, structural integrity, and historical provenance. She had lived a quiet, disciplined life, actively avoiding the chaotic, dramatic vortex her relatives constantly generated. But discovering her grandmother's hidden brass box had triggered a profound internal metamorphosis. The timid, compliant daughter was dead. In her place sat a calculated, highly strategic architect of absolute ruin. The extended aunts and cousins watched the silent standoff with growing, profound unease. Uncle Harrison, a man who had squandered 3 separate modest fortunes on failed agricultural ventures, coughed nervously into his linen napkin. Aunt Beatrice, whose primary social currency involved spreading malicious whispered rumors, adjusted her pearl necklace, attempting to distance herself from the sudden, terrifying drop in atmospheric pressure. They were simple, parasitic creatures who instinctively recognized when an apex predator had quietly entered their feeding grounds. Savannah thrust the writing implement closer, her initial arrogant smirk slowly dissolving into confused irritation. She lacked the intellectual depth to understand the complex power dynamics rapidly shifting around her. The youngest sibling only understood immediate transaction. She demanded her sister fix the monumental disaster because that was the established natural order of their dysfunctional universe. "Sign the stupid paper," Evie, the younger girl, whined, her voice cracking slightly under the unbearable silent scrutiny. "I am exhausted, and I want to go home to sleep." The sheer, profound audacity of the complaint hung suspended in the fragrant dining pavilion. The girl had practically sunk a priceless maritime vessel, escaped international jurisdiction through highly illegal financial manipulation, and now she was simply tired. Evangeline felt a sharp, brief flash of genuine pity for the spoiled creature. Savannah was completely unequipped to survive the coming absolute devastation. She was a fragile glass ornament about to be crushed beneath a massive falling iron anvil. Evangeline smoothly pushed her dining chair backward, the wooden legs scraping softly against the ancient brick flooring. She stood up, executing the movement with deliberate, slow grace. She was slightly taller than her aggressive mother, a physical advantage she utilized perfectly in this tense, crucial moment. She smoothed the front of her navy blue dress, ensuring not a single wrinkle marred her flawless presentation. The majestic composure she projected terrified Lorraine far more than any violent screaming argument ever could have. The matriarch took a small, involuntary step backward, bumping her hip against the heavy wooden table. The crystal glasses rattled ominously, threatening to spill their expensive, bubbly contents. The illusion of total maternal control was rapidly fracturing, splintering into 1,000 irreparable pieces right before the very eyes of their judgmental kin. Evangeline reached gracefully toward the smooth white tablecloth. She did not grab the silver pen. She did not sign the predatory loan agreement. Instead, she picked up her dark leather portfolio resting quietly beside her untouched porcelain plate. The room held its collective breath, anticipating an explosive, dramatic exit. But the gemologist had absolutely no intention of retreating from the battlefield. She was merely preparing to unveil the ultimate apocalyptic truth that would permanently shatter their false reality. The psychological warfare had failed, and the brutal, empirical evidence was finally ready to be deployed. The destruction of the false dynasty was now imminent. Evangeline looked down at the predatory loan agreement resting near her porcelain dinner plate. The crisp white paper represented a lifetime of institutional debt meant to chain her to Savannah's reckless destruction. She did not reach for the polished silver pen her younger sister offered. Instead, she extended her arm and placed her fingertips against the edge of the stapled contract. With a slow, deliberate motion, she pushed the paperwork away. The thick packet slid across the smooth linen tablecloth, stopping inches from the crystal floral centerpiece. The definitive rejection echoed louder than a shout in the silent dining pavilion. Savannah dropped her hand, her arrogant smirk fading into genuine confusion. Lorraine opened her mouth to issue another harsh demand, but the words died in her throat. Evangeline raised her right hand and placed it flat upon the table surface, directly beneath the warm glow of the overhead chandelier. The brilliant 18-karat gold mourning ring caught the light, radiating an undeniable ancient luster. The chipped black enamel crest stood out sharply against her pale skin. It was the exact ancestral heirloom Lorraine had sold for quick cash just 2 days prior. The matriarch's jaw dropped. The breath hitched painfully in her chest. She stared at the heavy band, her eyes widening in sheer terror. She knew she had fenced that item at an obscure French quarter shop and walked away with a handful of currency. Seeing the sacred artifact resurrected and resting upon her eldest daughter's hand shattered her curated reality. She tried to speak to form a coherent sentence, or perhaps mount a desperate defense, but only a weak, pathetic stammer escaped her lips. "You thought this was just an old ring," Evangeline said. Her voice did not shake. It projected clearly across the opulent dining room, carrying a clinical, devastating tone that sliced through the heavy, humid air. "You sold 70 years of our history for a plane ticket." The extended relatives shifted uneasily in their expensive velvet chairs. The older generation recognized the mourning ring instantly. They understood the profound cultural sacrilege required to pawn such a significant Creole artifact. The judgmental glares that had been targeting the independent gemologist slowly pivoted toward the pale, trembling hostess. Pawning family history to fund a luxury vacation violated the deepest unwritten rules of their society. Lorraine clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She attempted to regain control of the narrative, forcing a weak, trembling smile. She claimed there must be some terrible misunderstanding, or perhaps a clever replica involved. She stammered that she would never discard their shared heritage so carelessly, and suggested her daughter was playing a cruel theatrical trick. Evangeline did not argue. She did not engage in a petty verbal dispute. She simply raised her chin and offered a subtle, precise nod toward the shadowy, arched entrance of the private pavilion. The heavy mahogany doors pushed open. 2 individuals stepped out of the dim corridor and entered the bright dining space, changing the entire dynamic of the gathering. Aunt Camille led the way, projecting an aura of fierce, unshakable authority. The seasoned court archivist wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her posture rigid and commanding. She carried several thick, heavy leather dossiers tucked securely under her arm. Right behind her walked Marcel, the highly respected Royal Street antique dealer. He wore his traditional tweed vest and carried the quiet, undeniable credibility of a man who spent his life authenticating true history. He was not a member of their lineage, but his presence served a very specific, lethal purpose. He was an unimpeachable witness to the shady transaction. The gathered kin stared at the new arrivals in stunned bewilderment. Outsiders were never permitted into these private family tribunals. Bringing a municipal court archivist and a prominent French Quarter merchant into their intimate dinner party signaled a formal, serious escalation. Uncle Harrison adjusted his silk tie, looking nervously between the stern archivist and the pale hostess. Marcel stopped near the edge of the table. He looked directly at Lorraine. His expression held nothing but pure, professional disdain. He confirmed, in a steady, even tone, that the woman sitting at the head of the table had indeed walked into his shop demanding an immediate cash payout for the historic Devereux mourning ring. He stated clearly for the entire room to hear that she cared nothing for its provenance and only complained about the cost of premium airline seating. The antique dealer's calm, factual testimony stripped away the last remaining shreds of Lorraine's defense. The room erupted into shocked gasps and hushed, angry whispers. The matriarch shrank back into her chair, her face draining of all color until her skin resembled old parchment. Her fabricated tale of foreign persecution and martyred sacrifice evaporated, leaving only the ugly, undeniable truth of her immense greed. The pawnshop revelation was merely the opening maneuver. Evangeline allowed the harsh reality to settle over the audience before delivering the fatal blow. She turned her hand over, revealing the inner curve of the polished gold band. "You pawned a ring you never bothered to look inside of," Evangeline continued, her voice ringing with icy finality. "You were so desperate for temporary luxury that you failed to examine the foundation of what you threw away. Grandmother Odette knew exactly who you were. She knew you would eventually attempt to burn the estate to the ground. She left a map etched into this very metal, ensuring the key to our true legacy would only pass to someone who possessed the patience to look deeper." Savannah stopped smirking. The spoiled girl stared at her older sister, finally realizing that the ground beneath their feet was giving way. She did not comprehend the concept of a hidden map or a secret engraving, but she understood the terrifying shift in power. She looked toward her mother, expecting a fierce rebuttal, but Lorraine sat paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare. Evangeline gestured toward the imposing court archivist. Aunt Camille stepped forward with clinical precision. She unclasped the heavy leather dossiers and began walking slowly around the long banquet table. She stopped behind the most influential senior members of the extended family, including Uncle Harrison and Aunt Beatrice. She distributed thick, crisp copies of the certified, incontrovertible legal documents directly onto their porcelain dinner plates. The heavy packets contained high-resolution photographs of the microscopic cipher, the verified historical depository ledger entries, and the pristine property deed to the sprawling Bayou plantation. Most importantly, they contained the authentic, flawless testament drafted by Grandmother Odette's premier estate attorney. The older relatives eagerly opened the folders. The silence in the pavilion was broken only by the sharp rustle of turning pages. They read the airtight legal language detailing the vast hidden empire that had been quietly generating immense exponential wealth for generations. They saw the explicit, undeniable proof that a multi-million-dollar fortune existed right beneath their noses, shielded from the reckless spending habits of the current generation. They reached the third paragraph of the testament. The color drained from Uncle Harrison's face as he read the brutal, factual assessment of Lorraine's terminal superficiality. The document outlined her deliberate disinheritance in stark, unyielding terms. The patriarchs and matriarchs of the clan realized simultaneously that the desperate woman hosting this lavish dinner owned nothing. She was a broke, fraudulent impostor sitting upon a hollow throne, spending capital she did not legally possess. The predatory gazes of the gathered kin slowly lifted from the legal papers. They turned their collective focus toward Lorraine. Their eyes no longer held sympathy or familial loyalty. They looked at her with profound disgust and calculating anger. The sycophants instantly abandoned the sinking ship, aligning themselves with the true, verified sovereign of the Devereux wealth. Lorraine tried to stand up, but her legs refused to support her weight. She gripped the edge of the table, breathing heavily like a cornered animal. She looked wildly around the room, searching for a single friendly face, but found only cold rejection. The people she had spent her entire life trying to impress were now acting as her silent executioners. Savannah finally grasped the severity of the situation. The young girl realized the endless fountain of unearned wealth had permanently run dry. She stared at the forged repayment agreement resting on the table, knowing the staggering offshore yacht debt now rested entirely upon her own unprepared shoulders. She let out a soft whimpering sound, sinking low into her velvet chair. The psychological warfare had ended, and the bureaucratic execution was set in motion. Evangeline watched the predatory shift, knowing the true devastation was still approaching. The extended family was reeling from the secret inheritance, but the final piece of the trap remained untouched. The exposure of the catastrophic mortgage felony was resting quietly on the very next page of their dossiers, waiting to seal Lorraine's ultimate destruction. The heavy silence inside the opulent dining pavilion felt absolute as the extended relatives digested the monumental revelation resting directly upon their porcelain dinner plates. Evangeline stood at the head of the banquet table, systematically dropping the final bureaucratic blade upon her mother's artificial, crumbling empire. She directed the stunned audience to examine the high-resolution photographs documenting the microscopic cipher etched inside the antique gold band. She explained with clinical precision how that tiny, brilliant engraving served as a flawless geographical map leading directly to a highly secure underground depository located deep beneath the historic French Quarter. She described the ancient brass lockbox containing Grandmother Odette's true certified testament and the pristine deeds to their forgotten ancestral properties. The gathered kin read the crisp legal paragraphs in sheer horror, realizing the brilliant deceased matriarch had explicitly, permanently disinherited Lorraine due to her profound terminal greed and dangerous superficiality. The parasitic aunts and uncles understood immediately that the grand luxurious feast surrounding them was entirely unfunded and legally fraudulent. The expensive imported champagne chilling in silver buckets and the elaborate roasted delicacies resting on silver platters were purchased using phantom capital that Lorraine simply did not possess. The disgraced hostess sat frozen in her velvet chair, resembling a hollow, fragile statue about to shatter into countless irreparable fragments. She desperately attempted to formulate a coherent defense to explain away the damning paperwork, but her mind remained completely blank. The undeniable reality of her total financial destitution hung thickly in the humid Louisiana air, suffocating any potential argument before it could even form. However, the methodical gemologist was far from finished with her calculated, strategic destruction. She offered another precise, subtle gesture toward her formidable ally standing near the arched entryway. Aunt Camille stepped forward, projecting the terrifying, unyielding authority of a seasoned municipal veteran who had spent decades navigating the darkest corners of the parish justice system. The imposing archivist instructed the bewildered family members to turn toward the very last section of their heavy leather dossiers, where the true apocalyptic payload waited patiently to be deployed. A new wave of collective gasps echoed through the fragrant garden atmosphere as the relatives observed the final, damning digital footprints. Camille spoke with a loud, commanding voice that resonated forcefully against the ancient brick walls, ensuring every single person present heard the exact, undeniable charges. She detailed the discovery of the fraudulent second mortgage application, rapidly advancing through the intricate federal banking network. She pointed a manicured finger at the attached revoked proxy authorization and highlighted the blatantly forged public notary stamp procured from a corrupt Industrial Canal storefront earlier that exact same day. That specific, deliberate action constitutes severe felony mortgage fraud. Lorraine, the seasoned archivist, stated, delivering the professional assessment with absolute chilling certainty. You purposefully falsified official municipal property records, attempting to encumber a historic, protected estate that you do not legally possess in any capacity. The sheer staggering magnitude of the financial crime paralyzed the entire room. Uncle Harrison dropped his copy of the evidentiary dossier directly onto his pristine plate, splashing rich, dark gravy across the expensive white linen tablecloth. Aunt Beatrice covered her mouth with a trembling hand, staring at the pale hostess as if the woman had suddenly manifested a deadly, highly contagious disease. Committing a brazen white-collar banking crime was considered the ultimate unforgivable sin within their shallow, status-obsessed social circle, because it brought unwanted, dangerous federal scrutiny upon their collective hidden assets. Evangeline maintained her majestic, statuesque posture, refusing to offer even a single microscopic ounce of sympathetic warmth. She looked directly into her mother's panicked, terrified eyes and delivered the ultimate, undeniable geographic reality. She explained methodically that Lorraine literally owned absolutely nothing on this earth. The massive historic Garden District mansion, the sprawling hidden Creole plantation located deep within the remote southern bayou, and the vast generational wealth quietly generating exponential dividends all belonged exclusively to the eldest daughter. The entire legendary legacy was locked firmly behind an impenetrable network of secure, protective trusts operating strictly under Evangeline's sole, absolute, sovereign jurisdiction. The catastrophic legal consequences continued to multiply rapidly, leaving no possible avenue for escape. Camille folded her hands together, resting them against her charcoal suit jacket as she delivered the final administrative blow. The seasoned professional explained that her high-level municipal security clearance required mandatory immediate reporting regarding any discovered severe property felonies occurring within the parish limits. She informed the completely stunned audience that a comprehensive, time-stamped evidentiary package had already been electronically transmitted directly to the city district attorney just 1 hour prior to this lavish dinner gathering. The invisible bureaucratic gears were currently grinding forward, and highly aggressive state prosecutors were undoubtedly preparing formal criminal indictments at this exact moment. The immediate impending threat of severe federal prison time finally shattered the fragile, delicate illusion holding the youngest sibling together. Savannah stared blankly at the forged repayment contract resting near the beautiful floral centerpiece, finally comprehending the immense gravity of her situation. The spoiled girl slowly realized her endless, limitless source of unearned funding had permanently, completely evaporated into thin air. The monumental offshore restitution demanded by the angry Caribbean Maritime Syndicate now rested entirely upon her own, highly unprepared shoulders. She lacked the basic fundamental skills required to generate even modest legitimate income, yet she suddenly owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to incredibly dangerous foreign creditors. A loud, pathetic wailing sound erupted from Savannah's throat, echoing terribly across the quiet courtyard. She collapsed forward, burying her face into her folded arms, and began to sob uncontrollably. The bitter tears ruined her expensive cosmetics, severely staining her imported silk resort attire. The golden child was finally experiencing the crushing, agonizing weight of genuine adult consequence without a protective financial safety net to catch her inevitable fall. Total, blinding panic completely consumed Lorraine, forcing her to abandon her carefully cultivated aristocratic persona entirely. She scrambled frantically, attempting to stand, but her weak, trembling legs betrayed her, causing her to slump heavily against the solid wooden banquet surface. She reached out with shaking hands in a frantic, pathetic gesture of total submission toward the independent professional she had previously mocked. The disgraced matriarch began to babble incoherently, attempting to aggressively backpedal away from her heavily documented crimes. She pleaded loudly, using an agonizingly desperate tone, begging for mercy and demanding immediate, unconditional forgiveness from the child she had relentlessly tormented. She claimed fiercely that they were a deeply connected, loyal kin who must always support one another during times of intense, profound crisis, regardless of past minor disagreements. Lorraine desperately suggested they could simply utilize their combined influence to ignore the municipal authorities, withdraw the severe criminal complaint, and quietly share the massive newly discovered rural estate together as a unified front. She promised profusely to fundamentally change her demanding, toxic behavior and swore she would never again attempt to manipulate or deceive her brilliant, highly capable offspring. The gathered relatives watched the humiliating display with intense, morbid fascination, unable to look away from the spectacular domestic collapse. The powerful, dominant queen had been rapidly reduced to a weeping, begging peasant, pleading for basic survival scraps from the very individual she had continuously marginalized for decades. Evangeline did not step away from the grasping, desperate woman, nor did she offer a comforting embrace. She stood her ground, radiating the cold, hard brilliance of a flawlessly cut diamond, reflecting the ambient light. She absorbed the frantic, pathetic apologies, recognizing them instantly as nothing more than calculated, manipulative survival tactics designed to avoid well-deserved incarceration. She felt no lingering emotional obligation or residual childhood affection toward the weeping figure. The long, difficult years of severe emotional neglect and psychological abuse had permanently extinguished any natural familial warmth residing within her heart. She looked down at the frantic matriarch and shut her down completely with a single, devastating, factual sentence that severed their toxic bond forever. You cannot collect on an inheritance you actively tried to steal. The absolute crushing finality of the statement resonated throughout the silent dining pavilion, completely obliterating any lingering foolish hope Lorraine possessed. The desperate woman let out a soft, defeated whimper, sinking lower against the heavy furniture, completely conquered by her own monumental, staggering arrogance. Evangeline secured the dark leather portfolio securely under her arm, preparing to confidently depart the luxurious, catastrophic battlefield she had masterfully conquered with surgical precision. However, before the triumphant gemologist could cross the arched brick threshold toward the quiet evening courtyard, a sudden, violent commotion erupted near the main entrance of the historic restaurant. The heavy wrought iron exterior gates crashed open, loudly striking the ancient masonry with terrifying concussive force. Two massive, heavily tattooed men, wearing dark tailored suits and thick dark sunglasses, despite the late evening hour, shoved the protesting, uniformed maitre d' aside with brutal, effortless physical ease. They marched directly into the secluded private dining pavilion, scanning the terrified, bewildered faces of the extended aristocratic clan. One of the deeply intimidating intruders reached into his breast pocket and produced a crumpled, stained piece of paper bearing a handwritten address. He locked his cold, dead eyes directly onto the sobbing younger sister, still slumped helplessly over the banquet table. Savannah had foolishly, arrogantly, provided the elite dining establishment's exact coordinates to her dangerous Caribbean creditors, genuinely believing her mother would simply hand over a massive, certified bank check to instantly resolve the debt during dessert. The ruthless maritime syndicate had not sent polite legal negotiators. They had dispatched professional, violent underworld enforcers to collect their offshore money immediately, and they cared absolutely nothing about localized family disputes or complex municipal property fraud. Evangeline stopped entirely in her tracks, realizing the carefully controlled, bureaucratic legal victory had suddenly, unexpectedly, transformed into a raw, highly unpredictable physical threat. The sophisticated, elegant, aristocratic warfare was officially over, replaced entirely by brutal, vicious criminal debt collection. She clutched her ancestral portfolio tightly, rapidly calculating her next necessary defensive maneuver as the towering, silent enforcers blocked the only available exit, firmly trapping the entire ruined bloodline inside the luxurious private cage. The towering intruders stood motionless inside the luxurious dining pavilion, effectively blocking the only available exit. Their sudden, violent arrival completely shifted the atmospheric pressure within the historic room. The sophisticated, aristocratic warfare engineered by the arrogant matriarch was instantaneously replaced by raw, unpredictable criminal intimidation. The lead enforcer slowly removed his dark sunglasses, revealing cold, empty eyes that held absolutely no regard for local social hierarchy or complex municipal laws. He scanned the terrified faces of the gathered kin before locking his intense, predatory gaze directly onto the sobbing younger sibling. Savannah cowered beneath the expensive white tablecloth, finally realizing her foolish, arrogant decision to provide the exact restaurant coordinates had summoned genuine, lethal monsters directly to their private family gathering. Lorraine attempted to aggressively intercede, but her voice cracked into a pathetic, useless whisper. She possessed no actual financial leverage, and her previous theatrical bravado had completely evaporated under the imminent threat of actual physical violence. Evangeline remained perfectly still, maintaining her majestic, statuesque posture without showing a single trace of fear. She recognized immediately that the Maritime Syndicate cared absolutely nothing about domestic disputes or forged property deeds. They simply required immediate, monumental monetary restitution for their destroyed offshore vessel. The brilliant gemologist calmly opened her dark leather portfolio and retrieved the certified inheritance testament. She smoothly slid the crisp legal document across the smooth banquet surface until it stopped directly in front of the imposing syndicate representative. Evangeline spoke with a measured, even cadence, ensuring every spoken syllable conveyed absolute, unyielding authority. She informed the dangerous men that the weeping girl and the panicked mother possessed zero financial equity within the massive Devereaux estate. She explained clearly that their requested funds were entirely non-existent because the two desperate women were legally disinherited, bankrupt frauds. The lead enforcer picked up the heavy paperwork and silently read the highlighted paragraphs detailing the permanent bloodline exclusion. A grim, dark, humorless smile briefly touched his deeply scarred face. He dropped the authentic testament back onto the table and delivered a terrifyingly simple, factual verdict. Since the spoiled sister could not provide the required liquid capital, she would personally work off her staggering international debt through decades of severe manual labor. The massive men hauled the hysterical, screaming girl upright, confiscated her international passport, and dragged her forcefully out of the elegant, historic courtyard. Several days after the disastrous dinner party, Evangeline sat inside the quiet, sunny parlor of her ancestral mansion. She was reviewing complex estate documents alongside her highly capable sister-in-law, Valerie. Valerie was a formidable, brilliant African-American property litigation expert who had married into the extended lineage almost a decade ago. Growing up in a historic, vibrant neighborhood, Valerie had navigated incredibly complex municipal zoning laws before establishing a highly dominant downtown legal firm. She possessed a sharp strategic mind and an intimate, profound understanding of the corrupt political networks operating quietly throughout the southern parishes. Valerie handed Evangeline a thick, heavy stack of freshly printed federal indictments detailing the catastrophic legal consequences of the recent mortgage forgery attempt. The bureaucratic guillotine had finally fallen with lethal, highly satisfying efficiency. The blatantly fraudulent loan application had triggered a massive, severe federal investigation led by aggressive, ruthless Treasury Department prosecutors. The resulting heavy legal storm completely decimated any remaining superficial defenses the disgraced matriarch possessed. The government immediately froze every single bank account associated with her legally compromised name. Lorraine was aggressively, systematically stripped of her remaining meager assets, leaving her entirely, completely destitute. She was forcefully required to hastily pawn her extensive collection of imported designer garments just to secure a desperately inadequate, exhausted public defense attorney. The arrogant woman who had spent entire decades worshiping immense visible wealth was now facing severe felony criminal charges without a single reliable financial safety net beneath her. The accompanying social fallout was equally devastating and incredibly, terrifyingly swift. The historic New Orleans community operated strictly on a rigid, unspoken code of elitist conduct. The wealthy, aristocratic families completely, aggressively excommunicated the disgraced woman literally overnight. Nobody within the exclusive, tight-knit circles would ever speak to an individual who callously pawned a sacred, ancient heritage heirloom and shamelessly forged official municipal property records. Her previously high social standing was instantaneously, permanently vaporized. When Lorraine desperately attempted to visit her favorite exclusive country club, seeking sympathetic wealthy allies, the management publicly, forcefully escorted her off the manicured premises. She was permanently, coldly banished from the luxurious, insulated world she had callously sacrificed her own independent flesh and blood to inhabit. Meanwhile, international legal authorities ensured Savannah faced her own spectacular poetic justice across the ocean. Because her official travel documents were permanently, strictly flagged due to the massive offshore syndicate debt the spoiled sibling could never flee, the restrictive Caribbean jurisdiction, she was forcefully, promptly returned to the exact same beautiful tropical island she had recklessly, selfishly terrorized. The ruthless maritime creditors arranged a brutally restrictive, binding employment contract to slowly, methodically recover their lost, enormous capital. Savannah was legally forced into a menial, grueling hospitality job, cleaning the very luxury seaside resort she had previously violently vandalized. She spent her exhausting, endless days scrubbing porcelain toilets, changing heavily soiled bed linens, and serving highly demanding wealthy tourists under the blistering, scorching tropical sun. The endless, grueling physical labor completely stripped away her unearned, toxic arrogance entirely, providing a perfect, highly satisfying stroke of ultimate, beautiful karmic retribution. The final, inevitable eviction day arrived, bringing a heavy, gray, humid sky pressing down heavily upon the quiet southern city. Lorraine packed her few remaining cheap nylon suitcases in absolute, crushing defeat. Evangeline stood quietly on the grand wraparound porch of the magnificent Garden District house. She wore a simple, tailored, elegant dress, and her grandmother's heavy gold mourning ring gleamed softly brightly on her right hand. The independent, capable gemologist did not cruelly gloat or offer any malicious, petty parting insults. She simply leaned comfortably against the carved wooden railing and watched the completely disgraced matriarch slowly load her pathetic luggage into a waiting, rusted yellow taxicab. Lorraine never once looked back as the loud vehicle slowly rolled away down the massive oak-lined avenue, disappearing forever into a dismal, highly uncertain, terrifying future. The resulting profound silence left behind inside the massive historic residence was completely, entirely different from the oppressive, choking tension that previously infected the grand hallways. The quiet, beautiful atmosphere was not empty or terribly lonely. It felt profoundly, incredibly, deeply peaceful. The heavily toxic, manipulative elements constantly infecting her existence had been surgically, permanently, violently removed from her daily, independent reality. The constant, exhausting emotional manipulation, the frantic, terrifying financial anxiety, and the bitter, endless psychological warfare were completely, entirely gone. Evangeline walked slowly, calmly through the spacious, empty, sunlit rooms, feeling the heavy, ancient structural foundation finally breathing easily, comfortably around her. She had successfully, powerfully defended her rightful sovereign territory and emerged fully victorious, leaving only the pure, undeniable, crystal-clear truth of her proper legacy. However, the immense generational hidden wealth came securely attached to heavy, dangerous burdens that were just beginning to ominously surface. Evangeline entered the secure private study and sat confidently behind her grandmother's massive, carved, heavy oak desk. She opened the large bottom wooden drawer, intending to permanently safely store the certified fragile Bayou property deed. As she slid the crisp, important paperwork deep inside the cavity, her sensitive fingertips brushed against a tiny, unnatural, cold metallic ridge hidden cleverly along the dark interior wooden panel. She pressed the concealed, subtle mechanism gently, carefully. A small, secret, hidden compartment popped suddenly open with a soft, metallic, mechanical click, revealing a single, old, yellowed envelope sealed tightly with dark, thick, red wax. The young, vigilant estate guardian carefully, deliberately broke the ancient, brittle seal and unfolded the fragile, delicate parchment resting quietly inside. The old document was an urgent, highly confidential, terrifying legal warning, dated nearly 4 long decades ago. It meticulously detailed a massive, brutal, ongoing blood feud between the formidable Devereux lineage and a ruthless, massive global energy conglomerate. The massive, powerful corporate entity had been aggressively, illegally, falsely claiming total ownership over the forgotten swampy Bayou plantation, constantly attempting to brutally steal the incredibly rich, valuable mineral deposits hidden deep beneath the wet, muddy soil. The attached modern, recent satellite photographs clearly indicated the predatory, greedy corporation had recently aggressively resumed their hostile, dangerous drilling operations terribly close to the strict ancestral property borders. Evangeline stared intensely at the terrifying, complex corporate diagrams, slowly realizing her spectacular, brutal domestic war was merely a tiny preliminary skirmish. A new, incredibly massive, powerful, ruthless enemy was actively, aggressively invading her newly acquired quiet kingdom. And she had to immediately, rapidly prepare for a massive, unprecedented, highly dangerous corporate battle. A full solar cycle had wholly transformed the forgotten swamp territory into a majestic, pristine sanctuary. The setting sun painted the sprawling Louisiana wetlands with vibrant shades of fiery amber and deep bruised violet. Evangeline stood quietly upon the wide sweeping veranda of her ancestral Creole home. Immense ancient oak branches draped in thick silver Spanish moss framed the grand architectural masterpiece. She inhaled the rich, earthy scent of the wetlands, feeling a profound, undeniable connection to the dark, fertile soil beneath the wooden floorboards. The oppressive, suffocating anxiety that once defined her daily existence was permanently banished. In its place grew a fierce, unshakable confidence that radiated outward, commanding silent respect from anyone who approached the historic property. She rested her hands against the smooth, white-painted wooden railing. The magnificent 18-karat gold mourning ring adorned her right index finger. The heavy, historic artifact caught the dying golden daylight, reflecting a warm, brilliant glow. The imposing piece of jewelry represented far more than mere monetary value or superficial social status. It symbolized ultimate survival, exceptional intellect, and the unbreakable, sacred bond of true generational heritage. Evangeline traced the chipped black enamel crest with her thumb. She allowed her mind to wander backward, reflecting upon the chaotic, brutal journey that had brought her to this beautiful, isolated kingdom. Exactly 12 months prior, her entire reality had completely fractured. A petty, trivial theft committed by a desperate materialistic mother had accidentally triggered a catastrophic, spectacular downfall. Lorraine had callously discarded 70 years of family history for a meaningless, temporary airplane ticket. That single, arrogant action exposed a luxurious tropical vacation built utterly upon pathetic lies and staggering financial fraud. Evangeline remembered the microscopic hidden cipher etched deeply inside the golden band. That tiny, brilliant secret had systematically, effortlessly dismantled an entire fraudulent empire built upon shifting sands. She finally understood Grandmother Odette's profound ultimate strategy. The deceased exceptional matriarch never intended to simply hand over the vast accumulated wealth blindly to the next generation. The true magnificent gift was the cleverly designed mechanism engineered specifically to expose exactly who truly deserved the monumental inheritance. By burying the estate deed and requiring immense patience to uncover the truth, Odette successfully weeded out the parasitic, toxic elements infecting their bloodline. Lorraine and Savannah possessed zero respect for their lineage, only worshiping immediate, visible capital and cheap societal approval. Their insatiable, boundless greed became the exact weapon that executed their permanent social and financial exile. The heavy wooden front door opened behind her, bringing a welcome interruption to her quiet, solitary thoughts. Aunt Camille emerged onto the shaded porch carrying 2 crystal glasses filled with sweet iced tea. The seasoned municipal archivist looked remarkably relaxed, having traded her rigid, restrictive charcoal suits for comfortable, flowing linen garments. Close behind Camille walked Valerie, the fierce, brilliant African-American legal powerhouse who had recently married into their extended family tree. Valerie possessed a sharp analytical mind that had proven absolutely invaluable during the turbulent preceding months. When a massive, ruthless energy conglomerate attempted to illegally seize the Bayou Plantation earlier that spring, Valerie had launched a devastating, flawless counteroffensive. She utilized her profound, intimate knowledge of complex, modern municipal zoning laws and obscure environmental protections to thoroughly crush the hostile corporate invasion within a crowded federal courtroom. The highly capable sister-in-law handed Evangeline a thick, crisp legal folder. A victorious, confident smile illuminated Valerie's elegant face. She announced proudly that the final judicial injunction was officially, permanently signed by the regional magistrate. The greedy, predatory drilling company was legally barred from ever approaching the sacred ancestral borders again. Furthermore, the massive financial penalties levied against the aggressive corporation had fully funded the extraordinary renovations occurring within the historic property. Evangeline graciously accepted the refreshing beverage and the triumphant paperwork. She looked out over the sprawling, lush acreage. She had masterfully converted the massive detached carriage house into a state-of-the-art, world-class gemological laboratory. Bright, sterile fluorescent lights now illuminated incredibly expensive, sophisticated laser spectroscopy microscopes and precise cutting machinery. She successfully merged her deep passion for ancient rare stones with her newfound vast independent resources. The brilliant professional no longer answered to demanding toxic employers or suffered under the crushing weight of ridiculous familial expectations. She conducted high-level private appraisals for elite global clients entirely on her own strict terms. The quiet, secluded environment provided the perfect focused atmosphere required for her delicate microscopic examinations. She had built a thriving, legitimate, autonomous empire directly atop the solid, unyielding foundation of her formidable ancestors. The brutal, chaotic storm had finally, truly passed. The deceitful, treacherous betrayers remained permanently exiled, far away from this serene, protected paradise. Lorraine was currently enduring a miserable, lonely existence, residing inside a tiny, cramped, government-subsidized apartment located near the noisy, polluted industrial canal. The disgraced former socialite was forced to clip cheap paper coupons just to afford basic, generic groceries. Her former wealthy friends refused to acknowledge her presence whenever she desperately attempted to walk through the upscale commercial districts. Savannah remained trapped permanently on the distant, humid Caribbean island. The spoiled younger sibling was still working off her monumental, reckless yacht debt by scrubbing endless, filthy resort floors. The ruthless maritime syndicate ensured the arrogant girl never experienced a single moment of unearned luxury ever again. Their severe karmic punishments were flawlessly aligned with the strict logical consequences of modern American society, where actions always carry undeniable heavy weights. Evangeline took a slow, deep, refreshing sip of the cool, sweet beverage. She fully, comfortably stepped into her rightful, permanent role as the sole, sovereign matriarch and fierce guardian of the Devereaux legacy. The incredible, sprawling property beneath her feet was undeniably hers to command. She possessed the exceptional intellect, the vast financial capital, and the fiercely loyal chosen family required to relentlessly protect this hidden magical realm forever. The setting sun finally dipped below the distant watery horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the wet, muddy landscape. A chorus of nocturnal insects began their evening symphony, creating a peaceful, rhythmic hum throughout the dense surrounding forest. Valerie cleared her throat lightly, signaling that the professional portion of their evening was not quite finished. The brilliant attorney tapped the thick leather folder resting gently against Evangeline's arm. Valerie explained that while reviewing the defeated energy conglomerate's highly classified internal communications, she discovered a truly shocking, terrifying anomaly. The massive corporate entity had not been randomly drilling near the property borders, blindly searching for generic crude oil or common natural gas. Valerie produced a highly classified internal geological survey report stolen directly from the defeated executive's private server network. The detailed, colorful topographic maps indicated a colossal, unprecedented subterranean deposit of incredibly valuable rare earth minerals, crucial for manufacturing advanced modern microchips. The global technology market desperately needed these specific conductive elements, ensuring the hidden underground vein was worth billions of dollars. However, the most astonishing, devastating revelation was not the staggering hidden underground wealth. Valerie pointed toward the final encrypted digital signature authorizing the aggressive illegal drilling operation. Evangeline stared at the familiar, sweeping cursive handwriting, feeling the warm, humid air suddenly turn freezing cold against her pale skin. The ruthless, anonymous billionaire chief executive officer controlling the massive predatory conglomerate was not a faceless corporate stranger. The signature belonged undeniably, clearly, to her biological father, a man who supposedly tragically perished in a terrible boating accident over 2 decades ago. The ultimate, undeniable, shocking payoff hit the young matriarch with the forceful impact of a runaway freight train. Her wealthy, powerful, supposedly deceased parent had cleverly, ruthlessly faked his own death to escape Odette's iron control all those years ago. He was now secretly, aggressively returning to violently steal the hidden mineral fortune away from his own victorious, resilient daughter. The beautiful, peaceful illusion shattered instantly as Evangeline realized her spectacular, brutal domestic war against her mother was merely a tiny preliminary skirmish compared to the apocalyptic corporate blood feud that was rapidly approaching her doorstep. When the sweeping veranda of the Devereaux estate finally falls quiet and the violent echoes of family betrayal sink deep into the Louisiana mud, the silence left behind is anything but empty. It is heavy and resonant, vibrating with the ghosts of what could have been and the terrifying reality of what actually remains. The dark, untamed bayou serves as a flawless, living reflection of the traditional family unit itself. It is complex, deeply rooted, and entirely capable of swallowing those who refuse to respect its ancient, unyielding laws. Watching Evangeline stand victorious, yet newly besieged, on her ancestral porch forces us to collectively pause and examine the invisible foundations holding up our own homes. This continuing saga is far more than a dramatic tale of hidden wealth, forged legal documents, and spectacular corporate blood feuds. At its beating heart, it is a devastatingly accurate psychological mirror reflecting the treacherous landscape of modern American parenting. It demands we answer an unavoidable question regarding exactly what we are passing down to our children when the cameras are turned off and the bank accounts are permanently closed. In a contemporary culture increasingly obsessed with the rapid accumulation of visible capital, manufactured social prestige, and heavily curated public personas, the fundamental concept of legacy has become dangerously distorted. We frequently equate successful, responsible parenting with providing an impenetrable financial safety net. We automatically assume that inherited trust funds, exclusive luxury vacations, and elite educational access will somehow magically forge solid, resilient character. The tragedy of the Devereux family proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that material wealth, when completely divorced from fundamental moral responsibility and basic human empathy, is nothing but a lethal poison wrapped in shiny gold foil. Lorraine's irreversible failure as a matriarch was absolutely not born from a lack of monetary resources, but from a staggering, profound deficit of emotional awareness and basic parental honesty. She actively chose to raise her youngest daughter inside a beautiful, fragile glass house, constructed entirely from calculated lies, toxic entitlement, and unchecked greed. Savannah was never taught the heavy grounding value of a hard-earned dollar, the quiet dignity of honest labor, or the essential principle of fundamental fairness. Instead, she was meticulously groomed to be a relentless consumer of unearned prestige, genuinely believing her aristocratic surname was a permanent blank check, entirely immune to the harsh realities of adult consequence. Within a healthy traditional family structure, genuine fairness does not mean giving every child the exact same expensive material possessions. It means providing each individual child with the exact same unyielding standard of truth. Lorraine maliciously corrupted this sacred dynamic by deploying blatant, cruel favoritism. She weaponized her maternal affection, transforming unconditional motherly love into a cold, transactional currency awarded strictly for mindless compliance with her shallow aesthetic. Evangeline was systematically marginalized and subjected to severe emotional neglect simply because she possessed the one trait her mother feared above all else, which was an uncompromising demand for authenticity. Yet this specific, cruel neglect inadvertently forged an unbreakable psychological armor. While the golden child was slowly suffocated by the toxic fumes of unearned luxury, the outcast diligently learned the invaluable skills of absolute survival, intense intellectual rigor, and fierce self-reliance. It is a deeply poetic, bitter irony that the specific child intentionally denied the warmth of the family hearth was the only individual truly capable of preserving its ancient soul. This dynamic starkly illustrates the absolute necessity of raising children with a grounded, highly realistic worldview. Continuously shielding a growing child from necessary struggle does not protect them. It merely delays their catastrophic, inevitable collision with the real world. We must sharply contrast Lorraine's frantic, short-sighted greed with the brilliant, meticulous, long-term guidance engineered from beyond the grave by grandmother Odette. The deceased matriarch profoundly understood that true, enduring resilience is never simply inherited. It must be actively earned, rigorously tested, and fiercely defended against constant external threats. Odette clearly recognized the creeping rot of lazy entitlement infecting her lineage. Her decision to securely lock the generational wealth behind a highly complex cipher hidden within an ancient mourning ring was an act of profound visionary parenting. She deliberately did not leave her entitled descendants a simple offshore bank account. She intentionally left them a severe moral examination. Odette knew with absolute certainty that whoever possessed the immense patience, deep historical respect, and intense intellectual curiosity required to uncover the hidden map would inherently possess the exact fortitude required to protect the vulnerable empire. She withheld immense physical comfort specifically to ensure the ultimate survival of strong moral character. This strategic maneuver highlights a vital, often forgotten tenet of long-term child-rearing. Sometimes the most profoundly loving action a dedicated parent can possibly take is to step entirely back, remove the safety net, and force the next generation to definitively prove their worth. As we desperately try to process the heart-stopping revelation of Evangeline's powerful biological father returning from the dead to launch a ruthless corporate invasion, we realize that the cycle of familial betrayal and fierce territorial defense is completely continuous. The existential threat has simply evolved from domestic manipulation to global high-stakes warfare. This shocking twist forces the captivated audience to abruptly confront their own impending, unavoidable personal battles. The lingering ghosts of our past mistakes, the heavy consequences of our deepest deceit, and the unresolved fractures hidden within our own family trees will always resurface loudly, demanding a final reckoning. To successfully navigate these inevitable emotional storms, we must intentionally cultivate intense emotional awareness within the walls of our own homes. We must be entirely willing to sit quietly with our children in the highly uncomfortable spaces of personal failure, deep disappointment, and severe consequence, rather than constantly rushing forward to artificially fix their self-created problems. True, authentic parental responsibility absolutely requires us to be brutally, unflinchingly honest with our own reflections first. Are we actively modeling genuine integrity, or are we simply teaching our observant children how to better conceal their ugly flaws behind expensive, tailored suits? If this profound exploration of hidden family truths, shattered societal illusions, and fierce ancestral protection deeply resonates with the silent battles you currently face, I strongly encourage you to follow Pana Vengeance. Join a passionate, growing community dedicated to fearlessly exploring the darkest corners of human nature, alongside the triumphant, unyielding power of ultimate justice. There are countless more gripping, incredibly intricate narratives patiently waiting to be unveiled, each carefully designed to aggressively challenge your comfortable perspective and keep you firmly planted on the edge of your seat. We spend the vast majority of our fleeting lives desperately trying to leave a permanent, recognizable mark upon the shifting sands of the world, terrified that our brief legacy will be quietly erased by the relentless march of time. We exhaustively pour our limited energy into rapidly building, seemingly impenetrable fortresses of extreme wealth, elevated status, and pristine familial reputation, foolishly believing these hollow structures will somehow grant our vulnerable children eternal security against the inherent tragedies of human existence. Conventional, widely accepted parenting paradigms loudly dictate that our absolute primary duty is to unconditionally protect our fragile offspring from the harsh, unforgiving nature of reality. We are constantly told that a good parent is an impenetrable, perfect shield, always ready to absorb the devastating blows of the world so the child never has to feel the sting of failure. This is a comfortable, dangerous lie. The truest, most profound, and ultimately most transformative manifestation of genuine familial love is absolutely not a shield. It is a raging fire. We do not owe our children an easy, frictionless, heavily padded existence constantly subsidized by our own grueling accomplishments. To truly, deeply love a child is to ruthlessly deny them a soft landing. Providing a massive financial inheritance without first demanding the moral character necessary to sustain it is merely funding a spectacular future tragedy. Ultimately, the greatest, most enduring legacy you can possibly leave your bloodline is not a heavy chest of gold, nor a pristine corporate empire. It is the terrifying, profound willingness to intentionally introduce them to the flames, allowing their false, entitled selves to burn completely to the ground, so they might finally discover the necessary internal strength to resurrect their own unbreakable souls from the ashes.